and welcome to the 12th Annual International Women's Day Forum. This year, our event feels more important than ever before. I'm Mark DeCourcy, the Senior Vice President of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, and I lead the Chamber's Corporate Citizenship Center. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge how deeply saddened we all are by the violence against Ukraine. The Chamber Foundation is here to help the victims, especially the women and children of Ukraine, and we'll share more on that throughout the program. We can all agree that women have encountered seismic shifts in how they work and how they live during the past few years, and they have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. About 3 million women have left the workforce since the start of the pandemic in 2020. Women are now more burned out than ever before, and the burnout gap between women and men has almost doubled. In January of this year, women's workforce participation was a staggering low 57%, a rate that's not been seen since 1988. Getting women back to work is critical for our economic recovery as a nation. And as employers, it's our responsibility to help them come back. We have an opportunity to create new systems that work better for women and empower them to reach their full potential. And as a husband, a father, and a business leader, I'd be remiss if I didn't emphasize the role that men could and should play by being allies to women at home, in the workplace, and everywhere in between. As we celebrate International Women's Day this coming Tuesday, it is a day to honor the achievements of women everywhere, but it's also a day to continue our call for change. The choices we make today as business execs, government officials, and civil society leaders will have an impact on gender equality, not in just this moment, but for decades to come. As we're seeing in Ukraine, any gains we've made in women's empowerment can be reversed, and we cannot let that happen. We must work together to ensure all women and girls around the world have an equal opportunity to succeed. Because a future that does not include a full and equal participation of women will not be a future that is resilient. Over the next 2 days, we'll hear from senior leaders across industries and how they're seizing this moment to accelerate progress. We'll cover a host of timely topics, including the labor crisis and unique ways companies are approaching women's return to work, what employers can do to advance women's mental health, innovations in childcare, as well as humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. I'd like to thank our strategic partner, the U.S. Department of State, and for all our event sponsors for making today's forum possible. We're grateful to have all of you joining us virtually from all parts of the country and from around the world. And we hope to get back in person soon to enjoy all the great moments that we have with in-person events.
As many in the audience may be aware, Guyana, the only English-speaking country in South America, identifies as a Caribbean nation and is currently one of the least developed countries in the Western Hemisphere. But that is about to change. With over 10 billion barrels of proven oil reserves discovered in the past 7 years, Guyana, a country of fewer than 1 million people, is facing an extraordinary transformation. And women and girls need to be a part of this transformation, which is why we are here today. Mrs. Blair, could you please tell us a bit about the Road to Growth program? What does it aim to do? What are some of its successes? And what can we expect in the future going forward?
Well, I'm delighted to be able to tell you about the Road to Growth program. Thanks to funding from the Global Funding, we established this program back in 2015 when we started in Nigeria at that time. And we designed the program as an intensive 7-week business management and investment readiness course for women entrepreneurs. It's a unique, custom-built online learning tool which combines the online learning with in-person sessions and events. And it enables the women to grow profitable business by building their business skills and their financial literacy, along with access to resources, and of course that very important building of networks with each other, because networks really matter in business. But we depend and we work very closely with our local, fantastic in-country partners who provide the coaching and help us develop the learning models. And in Guyana, we have Action Invest, who have been working with us on this program. And so therefore we have locally based knowledge to help the women we work with build successful businesses and become, as the minister said,
leaders in their community. So we started in Nigeria. Since then, we've done it in Mexico, in Indonesia, in Vietnam, in Kenya, and now in Guyana. Now, we started small in Guyana. We piloted it last autumn with just 28 women entrepreneurs. But they've literally just about finished last month their course, but 96% are already reporting that they're using their learning in their businesses. One woman from Guyana said that the road to growth has served as a complete eye-opener for her business and had changed so many aspects of her business to an exemplary standard. But in addition to that, we've also got, and we are also piloting, not piloting, doing now in Guyana, our Her Venture app. Now, this is a mobile-based, award-winning business skills app. And we've already supported with that app 50,000 women worldwide. And it's been amazing how the Guyanese women have absolutely responded to this app, which 5 months ago we launched. We've had 5,000 women already download the app, which is 1 in 50 of the women in Guyana. So that's amazing. And already 89% of the users are reporting that they too are implementing the ideas and the training in their business practices. And I know that they will go on to do even more amazing things as they go through the course and as they adapt it in a way that suits them. We're going to have a second Road to Growth program, which is going to commence in Guyana in a couple of months. And we're looking forward to welcoming more women to that course and having great success with them as well.
So much for everything that you've done across the globe and specifically here in Guyana. I was at the launch of the app, and I know it's been very, very successful. So thank you for that. Minister Persad, back to you. The economy of Guyana promises to undergo some fairly significant changes in the coming years, for sure. How will women entrepreneurs fit into the economic life of the country moving forward? And could you tell us a little bit about your initiative?
I think that is a very, very significant question because we are very focused on having more women in the labor force, but not only just in the labor force, at a very, very empowered level. And the government of Guyana has significantly budgeted towards empowerment of women, focusing on their jump into the workforce, on their role in microenterprise, and specifically through the Ministry of Human Services and Social Security, the initiative that I launched last year called the WIN Initiative, by no coincidence, WIN, Women's Investment Innovation Network, really seamlessly transitions into our wider vision as government to ensure that women right across the country benefit from all the opportunities. So the Women's Innovation Investment Network allows us to work with women in the hinterland, as in our Amerindian or indigenous women, women in remote and rural communities. And last year, we were able to train women in a number of areas and disciplines, 2,170 women. And we were able to do it in a hybrid model where women were exposed to training in person and virtually. The idea behind this was to fit what we were offering into the lifestyle of those women and to open the opportunities wider than they perhaps conceptualized. Because when we introduced these programs, behind all of it, my thinking was not to let them move into conventional areas of training. So there was heavy focus on ICT, looking at the niche vacancies available in the public and private sector, and focusing on big areas of health and care linked directly to this ministry and the Ministry of Health. And when we started the program and it was launched, we did not expect the overwhelming influx of women to this program. Although we were able to train just over 50% of those who applied to the program, it made me realize quite so that this year I have to increase what we're planning to do. And we are hoping to train 4,000 more of those women. Now, the importance of all of this is to ensure that women understand that they can have the homemaker role as well as they can work from home, as well as they can look at unconventional avenues of opportunity where they can have financial benefit. And I think women are cottoning onto it quite well because many women have said that the program is nothing short of life changing. My office door swings all the time with women coming off the road to say, well, we did not think that we could do this, because one of the things I was very specific about was not to have any eligibility criteria for entrance into the program, because I was looking at the level of literacy and how women perceive themselves as being eligible for the existing programs. So this program caters to all women and women all across the country, and they literally have to have no necessary academic background, because coupled with the training in the disciplines, every woman is exposed to core training which focuses on our legislation, social ills and issues including domestic violence, child abuse, and learning about the services that we provide. This year we will add a component of life skills or life coaching for these women so that they can be mentally prepared to jump into the world of entrepreneurism, and they can also utilize their skills in a very balanced manner, balancing all the things they do in life. And I didn't stop there. I made sure that we looked at it in a big picture manner from a vantage point. What happens after training? And so the first female business incubator has been launched, and that provides continuation of where we left off from the training, where women can now bring their skills and products to be quality proofed and marketed for them. The Win app is also really gathering a lot of hype in Guyana, and right now we have almost 400 women signed on to the Win app, which allows free advertising of their business and their products. But I must say to Mrs. Blair that at that launch, I had the opportunity to speak as well. And from then, we partner with Action Invest. So every class of women, every class, that class is exposed to your app. And it has been well utilized. And so the number that you refer to, a big section of that comes from the Win network. And so I think that's where there are crucial partnerships and really good partnerships where women are now understanding that we can learn from home, we can work from home, and we can expand in a very different way and not stick to necessarily the conventional methods. So it's thinking out of the box and is really giving women solid support in all directions.
Thank you, Minister. And it's so great to hear that you're working together in partnership. That's terrific. Mrs. Blair, the Sherry Blair Foundation for Women has focused squarely on breaking down barriers that women face in starting, growing, and expanding their businesses. Could you help us understand how those barriers impede the success of women entrepreneurs?
Well, absolutely. And may I say how delighted I am that we are working closely with the government, with the minister, because it's that partnership between government, between private enterprise like ExxonMobil and foundations like ours that really can and is in Guyana moving the needle. But you're right, of course, Ambassador, to refer to the wider issues. I mean, this year, International Women's Day is focusing on the theme Break the Bias. And, you know, this question of stereotypes, of the idea of what is and what is not appropriate for women to do, is deep rooted in gender inequality and sexist attitudes, and it persists everywhere. And our main research and advocacy focus in the foundation is actually about challenging gender stereotypes and bias. And we've done a couple of research topics on this. But in November, we released our latest research, which you can see on our website. But we showed there how gender stereotypes affect women from the very beginning of their journey. So it actually goes right back to even in childhood. And it's the root cause of so many economic, social, and legal barriers that women face. Start in education. Inequalities in education, which exist across the world, mean women and girls start their economic lives disadvantaged, without essential skills and knowledge.
then it seeps into the laws of so many countries where business ownership is concerned. There are often laws that make it harder for women to own businesses, and certainly make it harder because they don't have the capital that's often required. And that then also permeates women's access to business finance, their ability to network, to find role models, to get into markets. And of course, the expectation around domestic roles for women, domestic and care work, mean that women's time is also limited, and that limits their power, their ability to actually participate in the economy, which is why flexible learning, the sort that the minister is talking about, the sort that we do with our app and we do with the Road to Growth, is so important. You have to, if you're going to give women opportunities, make sure that you're molding your training that actually fits the reality of women's lives when they have domestic expectations that they can't just walk away from. And family attitudes, family support is very, very important. And most of all, it's about self-belief. You have to have that confidence and self-belief. And too often women are told what they can't do. Minister, you and I, and you too, Ambassador, were lucky enough to be told what we can do. But too often, girls are told that's not for you because you're a girl. And this is, of course, damaging, not just for women and girls themselves, but to everyone. We all benefit when everybody has an equal chance to participate. And if we limit important opportunities and services for women, then we prevent women doing what they do so well, which is actually giving back. Because you find that if you invest in women, they are more likely to invest in the education and health of their children. They're more likely to give back to their wider community, and as a result, make sure that the whole nation benefits from development. So this year, the call for International Women's Day, which is Break the Bias, is so important because it goes down to the root cause of what's holding so many women back.
Yes, so important. Couldn't agree with you more, Mrs. Blair. And thank you for those important thoughts. Minister Prasad, could you briefly, I know we're winding down, just a couple more questions here if you still have the time. Could you briefly share with us your experience? Specifically, who've been your mentors and how important is it for women to help other women?
I think that women helping other women is perhaps the key to everything, because the most powerful women can open some of the most important doors for other women. And if we are to start that network of that chain of women helping other women, I think more and more women will gravitate towards opportunities that they perhaps thought that they could never ever have. And it also allows us as women to appreciate how tough it is for some women to get past the stereotypes that Mrs. Blair spoke of. And I think breaking the bias is perhaps the best way of framing it for the theme of this year's celebration, because bias is there in everything, whether you speak of opportunities or you want mobility upwards or leadership exposure, bias is always there. So mentorship is crucial, and mentorship comes in many different shapes and forms. My earliest mentors, I would say again, would be my parents, because they taught us to never limit ourselves in the way we thought, nor should we limit ourselves in the direction that we wanted to take. And so it allowed me personally to move into very male-dominated environments and to challenge many things, because coming from a conservative home and environment, I was able to break a lot of the barriers that were considered taboo. And then each woman that you met in a sphere that she called her own, you were able to learn from that woman through her experiences. So every conversation, every engagement, every interaction, I would consider that mentorship, because I was able to learn from each person that I met and to be receptive to learning, because everyone's perspective and views should have equal weight. And if we are going to create the kind of environment that can really empower generation next of women, we have to start letting them know that we're the ones who are going to open those channels so that they can easily walk through, and literally it's a pay forward system. So that would be my take on it.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Yes, mentorship can come in so many different forms, that's for sure. Ladies, ExxonMobil says when women move forward, the world moves with them. So, Mrs. Blair, what do you believe has worked well when the Sherry Blair Foundation for Women partners with the private sector?
Well, first of all, I think our relationship with ExxonMobil Foundation is a real proof about how true that is. Together, we have been able to empower over 30,000 women since we first started working together in 2015. And this collaboration, working with in-country partners, bringing our specialist skills and knowledge about using technology and how to incorporate that into training programs to reach so many women, along with the smart, can-do, entrepreneurial flair that the ExxonMobil Foundation has really made a difference. You heard earlier the minister saying that if we can work together in partnership, private sector, NGOs like mine, and of course the government, then working together with our complementary skills and the reach that we can gain through the government can really move the needle. And this is a model which is recognized in the Sustainable Development Goals. Partnership is very key for that. But I believe that what you'll see in Guyana over the next few years is living proof, if you like, woman invite woman, as to why this virtuous cooperation between the three areas, the third sector, the government, and the private businesses can really, really work. Because at the end of the day, what we're looking at is not the old model of philanthropy, which is giving people a handout, but actually what we're looking at is putting power into the hands of the individuals, enabling them to remove the barriers to their success and their equality, because they, in the end, know absolutely what works in their environment. We can bring expertise and skills to help them, but we passionately believe in the end, it's about enabling every woman to make the choices that are right for her.
Fantastic, great. And finally, Minister Prasad, specifically in Guyana, how can partnerships with the private sector help the government of Guyana achieve its goal to increase women's economic empowerment? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we've already seen the benefits of partnership here through the Ministry of Human Services and Social Security, because many of our programs would have been supported post the training with other partners bringing things on board, whether it's financial assistance to start their businesses through grants or provision of equipment to accelerate their growth in business, and also looking at how they can sustain and expand. So I think partnership is very crucial when we come towards empowering women, because I believe that women should not only look towards the handout mentality that existed for a long time. We should teach them through tangible support that they can now look after themselves and still maintain all the other opportunities that they want for themselves outside of a work environment. So I believe that corporate social responsibility is very important for private entities to utilize in a sustainable way to feed into all of the programs that will work with women on training, on the opportunities to start their own business, to sustain, to grow, to mentor, to bring the kind of expertise as a developing country that we need to look at unconventional areas that our country will now require to focus on traditional sectors, but bring modern technology that exists out there, and to look at the oil and gas sector that we are now focused on as a country, and at the exciting opportunities that are now available. So partnership in so many ways, whether locally, internationally, or with the NGOs, those things can add significantly. And we do need to maintain the focus not only in the urban setting, but also looking at the remote rural settings and the hinterland, and to utilize some of the resources that women have there, some of the skills they have there, and look at how we can use the private sector partnerships to have markets on networking platforms, on social media platforms, and even how people can now buy from women. I love the tagline that we've started, made for the world by the women of Guyana. And that's something I would like to keep on promoting so that the world can appreciate what the Guyanese women have to offer.
Thank you so much, Minister Prasad. And thank you both so very much for taking time out of your very busy days. I think we could go on and continue this discussion, but I will let you get back to what you do best. And thank you so much for all that you do for women's empowerment across the globe, and specifically here in Guyana during this truly transformational time here. Thank you, ladies, very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, Mark DeCourcy from the Chamber Foundation. We promised you an update on Ukraine. We wanted to give it to you now. What we do know from news reports that over 1 million refugees have fled the country into neighboring countries. What we do know is the majority of those are women and children, and the situation is dire. Fortunately, we're joined today by the U.S. Aid Deputy Administrator, Paloma Adams-Allen, and she can give us a really good update on the situation on the ground and maybe even some ideas on what companies can do to be involved in the relief effort. Deputy Administrator, over to you.
Thank you so much, everybody. I'm actually going to focus my remarks on women and including what women are doing in Ukraine, if you don't mind, and happy to go into more detail later about what's happening at this moment in Ukraine. Does that work for everybody? Yes? Mark?
Yes, that'd be great.
Fabulous. All right. So good afternoon, everyone. It's really such a pleasure to be here with you today for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation's 12th Annual International Women's Day Forum. Each year during Women's History Month, we recommit to building a world where every woman and girl is afforded the rights and opportunities they deserve. Real progress has been made in recent decades, yet women and girls continue to shoulder a profoundly disproportionate burden of the impacts of today's global challenges. As we cross the 2-year mark of a global pandemic, we're reminded that women are playing an outsized role in responding to the virus as healthcare workers and caretakers on the front lines around the world, even as a pandemic has disproportionately pushed them out of the workforce and prompted more attacks on their safety and their rights. As the rate and severity of climate shocks continue to rise globally, we're faced with a jarring fact that women and girls are significantly more likely to be killed by natural disasters. And when conflict breaks around the world, as we've seen this week following Russia's unprovoked and unjustified invasion of Ukraine, women and girls face an increased risk of exposure to violence, exploitation, and impacts on their health and well-being. I want to emphasize that within each of these challenges, women are not merely helpless victims, as we've seen and we know, but rather catalysts for action. Their leadership can have transformative effects on their communities and their countries. For more than 30 years, Ukrainian women have been leading the fight for a Ukraine that is free, democratic, and prosperous. And as Russian tanks and troops began their illegal maneuvers into Ukraine's territory last week, Ukrainian women joined the fight to defend their homeland and the democratic principles they've worked so hard to advance. As the conflict continues to unfold, we're seeing women play a crucial role in resisting Russia's campaign of violence, responding to the urgent needs of their communities, combating disinformation, taking up arms to fight, and engaging on the diplomatic front to bring an end to the conflict that has already driven 1 million innocent Ukrainians from their homes. For almost 50 years, USAID has focused on gender equality and women's and girls' empowerment in the countries where we work, and for good reason. When we unlock the full potential of all people, including women and girls, it makes their countries more peaceful and prosperous, paying huge economic and security dividends for us all. So I come today bearing a simple message. if you're looking for ways to generate economic growth and opportunity, invest in women's empowerment and gender equality. The evidence could not be more clear. When women and girls enjoy the full range of rights and freedoms they deserve, economies grow and communities flourish. In fact, the McKinsey Global Institute estimates that narrowing the global gender gap could generate $12 trillion in annual GDP. That is why USAID has set forth an ambitious agenda to boost women's participation in the global economy. Our agency's Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Hub, together with our missions from around the world, currently manages over $300 million supporting over 100 activities in more than 60 countries. Activities that increase women's economic security and provide them with the tools they need to help their countries prosper. At the same time, we are demonstrating the business case for women's economic empowerment around the world. Take USAID's partnership with PepsiCo as one example. Women make up a significant portion of the agricultural workforce in India, but face significant challenges accessing and retaining land rights, preventing them from fully benefiting from the products they themselves grow. By engaging women as critical partners in West Bengal, India, USAID and PepsiCo are providing access to land and sustainable agricultural practices, increasing yields and net profitability for rural farmers. But in order to fully realize the benefits of empowering women in the global economy, we need to see an industry-wide change. Rather than working with one company at a time, USAID aims to influence entire sectors and industries that are ready to adopt gender-smart practices. And with the help of the US Chamber of Commerce, we have an opportunity now to shift social norms that have historically kept women on the sidelines and kept businesses from realizing their full profit potential. To accelerate the pace of change, USAID has developed a women's economic empowerment community of practice that has grown to include over 600 members from across our agency, our implementing partners, including local organizations and businesses led by women, and external private sector partners, foundations, and multilateral organizations. With greater coordinated attention to and investments in women's economic empowerment, we can achieve results at scale that revolutionize the domestic and international labor force, benefiting women, families, and entire countries, all while boosting competitiveness, company performance, and global GDP. If increasing returns by improving gender equality and women's economic empowerment within your company or industry resonates with you, USAID is ready to engage. Thank you for inviting me to join you this afternoon. I look forward to the work ahead.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Vasquez, CEO and co-founder of We Connect International, a global nonprofit leading the way on gender inclusive sourcing by supporting women and businesses in 130 countries seeking access to business opportunities with our member buyers, including many of you representing over $1 trillion in annual purchasing power. I want to thank the US Chamber of Commerce Foundation team for bringing all of us together for this 12th annual International Women's Day Forum and for hosting this incredible panel on global perspectives on women in the world with key thought leaders, including Kate Benkin, Vice President, Lead of Microsoft Philanthropies for Microsoft, Laura Lane, Chief Corporate Affairs Officer for UPS, and Rachel Vogelstein, Senior Advisor for the White House Gender Policy Council. As all of you know, women are at a milestone moment right now. The COVID pandemic and now the crisis in the Ukraine has challenged women and their families in immeasurable ways, but have also provided opportunities for incredible innovation and for growth. Each of these expert panel members come at this topic from a different place. So from your vantage point, what is the current state of women in the world? Let's start with Laura, and then Kate, and then Rachel. Laura?
Thanks, Elizabeth. Well, I believe the state of women is that they are strong and they will overcome any of the challenges that they face. But what we've seen is women have borne the brunt of this pandemic. The reality is they socioculturally have been the ones that have had to not only maybe keep working, but also being caregivers to their children who, with schools having gone into virtual settings, as well as caregivers for their elderly family members. And we've seen a lot of women-owned businesses really be challenged in terms of keeping their operations going. But if I know anything, I know when women thrive, humanity thrives. And that's why UPS has been on the front lines, making sure that throughout this pandemic, we've been providing those helping hands to women to get their businesses back up and running, being advocates for them internationally in terms of eliminating those barriers that make it harder for them to not only overcome the challenges of, economic activity during a pandemic, but the fundamental challenges of running a business. And third, we've been out there when crisis has hit, above and beyond when the pandemic has challenged them. We've been there with humanitarian relief, and right now we stand with the women and the children that are crossing the borders right now from Ukraine. UPS is standing up $1 million of relief. We're putting our expertise in terms of logistics, as well as our people and our ability to respond in the times of crisis like we did during the pandemic, bringing it right there to help the people of Ukraine as they're crossing into neighboring countries. And so the state of women right now is challenged, but I know that they are strong, and we just need to be thinking about what we can do in concrete ways to support them get back on their feet, grow their businesses, and help them continue to provide for their families. And in that regard, economic empowerment of women is a UPS core value, which is why we're going to keep doing all that we can to support them on all of these fronts. And I know we'll go into a deeper discussion on that throughout the course of the panel. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Wow, thank you, Laura. Kate?
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks, Laura, for those comments, and congratulations for everything that UPS is doing with this terrible situation in Ukraine. When we think about, we know that talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. And this statement, I think, is especially true for women and girls. One of the greatest challenges facing women today is the lack of economic opportunities, which in turn deprives women of opportunities for empowerment, for economic freedom, for social mobility. And as we heard from Paloma and from Laura just now, COVID's only heightened those challenges for women and girls, including increasing the risk of violence, job losses. The caretaking burden has fallen disproportionately on women. And too many women around the world still face structural inequalities that are creating barriers to finding quality employment, quality livelihoods, and a feeling of safety in their communities. That being said, from my vantage point in the tech sector and within Microsoft Philanthropies, I also can't help but feel optimistic. I see the opportunity that technology presents for women and girls. It can help empower them to access services, to engage with each other, to pursue economic opportunities. And one of the things that we focus on is you can't benefit from technology if you don't have the right skills. And so we need to create opportunities for women to gain the digital skills that they need to improve their livelihoods, gain employment or micro-entrepreneurship opportunities. And this focus on digital inclusion anchors a lot of the work that we do in Microsoft Philanthropies, with the idea that every person, every woman, every girl in every community around the world should have the opportunity to get the skills needed to secure the jobs of today. And we do that by partnering with fantastic nonprofits all around the world to help equip women with digital literacy, digital skills to help empower them in more ways. And we know that when we invest in women, there's a multiplier effect. I like how Paloma referred to women being catalysts of action. And we know that when women are able to work and access quality jobs,
they're more likely than men to invest a higher proportion of their incomes back into their families and communities. So there's a lot to do, but I also feel optimistic about the state of women in the world, because I see some of the fantastic work that our nonprofit partners are doing that's making a real impact to address these challenges. You know, a couple of examples. In Japan, we work with a great organization called Single Mothers Sisterhood to help single mothers, which is one of the most underserved segments in Japanese society. In Latin America, we partner with MasterCard and UN Women to help bring digital skills and financial skills to women. So I think, you know, there's just a couple of examples. There's huge challenges, there's a lot to do, but there's also cause for optimism.
Thank you for leaving us with that note of optimism. I appreciate that, Kate. Rachel?
Well, I want to start by thanking our hosts for organizing this important discussion today, Elizabeth, to you for moderating, and to my co-panelists. It's great to be with all of you. I also want to echo my U.S. government colleague and acknowledge the bravery of the people of Ukraine and the hundreds of thousands of people, disproportionately women and children, who are being displaced. You know, in answer to your question, this is a challenging moment for women in Ukraine, in Afghanistan, in Ethiopia, and in other regions of conflict and instability. And it's also a challenging moment for women globally, as was already recognized in our discussion today, as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, which, as we know, has fueled an economic crisis, a health crisis, and a caregiving crisis, each of which has had disproportionate effects on women and girls, and especially women and girls of color. You know, we know that here in the US, it took just 1 year to erase 30 years of progress in women's labor force participation, that millions of women lost their jobs or were forced to leave the workforce or cut back on hours to take care of their families. And as I'm sure this audience knows well, this trend was reflected globally. While women make up only 39% of the global workforce, they account for well over half of pandemic-related job losses. And of course, we also saw reports of gender-based violence rise dramatically, both here in the US and around the world. So the pandemic has really shone a light on these pre-existing disparities and inequities, and it has reinforced that our economy simply cannot reach its full potential if we are leaving half of the population behind. It shows that our efforts to promote gender equity and equality are more essential than ever. And that's why this has been a priority for the Biden-Harris administration from the start. Last year on International Women's Day, President Biden issued an executive order formally establishing the White House Gender Policy Council, which builds on previous White House women's initiatives in the Clinton and Obama administrations, but it's also carving a new path. The Gender Policy Council works alongside other White House Policy Council, including the Domestic Policy Council, the National Economic Council, and the National Security Council, to advance gender equity and equality across our government. It's comprised of virtually every cabinet secretary, and we have a dedicated policy staff here at the White House. Years of research have shown that when women are better off, everyone is better off. We know that gender equality is not only a matter of human rights, justice, and fairness, but it's also a strategic imperative for the United States government, for nations around the world, and of course for the private sector.
Wow, Rachel, thank you for that sobering assessment of where we are. As you noted, the White House has put a tremendous focus on gender equality and equality writ large. And the council, only a year old, has done some incredible work already. Can you give us some specific examples in line with your priorities and the progress you're already making?
Absolutely. Last year, in that same executive order that created the Gender Policy Council, President Biden mandated the development of the first ever strategy, national strategy, to advance gender equity and equality through both domestic and foreign policy. And we are proud that this past October, the administration issued our country's first ever such strategy. It was the product of a robust consultation process led by the Gender Policy Council and was informed by input from every White House component and agencies across the executive branch. You know, the strategy is significant for several reasons. First, because it's the first. It's the first time we've ever had such a strategy, and really speaks to the administration's commitment to gender equity and equality. Second, because it's the first whole of government effort to advance this critical priority, marshaling the capacity of every department and agency across our federal government. Third, the strategy is significant because it advances gender equality through both domestic and foreign policy, for the first time really uniting our efforts to close gender gaps both at home and abroad. And finally, it's significant because it really demonstrates U.S. commitment. There are really only a handful of other nations that have created national gender strategies, and we are hopeful that our doing so will have a catalytic effect on the world stage. The strategy itself offers a set of guiding principles for the administration's work, including that we employ a whole of government approach, and that we take an intersectional approach that recognizes overlapping forms of discrimination on the basis of gender, race, and many other factors. The strategy identifies 10 interconnected strategic priorities, which encompass economic security, gender-based violence, health, education, justice and immigration, human rights and equality under the law, security and humanitarian relief, climate change, science and technology, and democracy, participation, and leadership. And the strategy recognizes that these priorities are inherently linked and must be tackled in concert. The strategy also outlines an implementation plan to ensure that it's not just words on paper, but is actually implemented in practice. And right now, every federal department and agency is developing its own strategy implementation plan. But even while that work is ongoing, we've already made progress in our first year on many of the priorities identified in the strategy. So with respect to improving economic security and accelerating economic growth, to build back better and achieve an equitable recovery, both at home and abroad, we've been working to ensure that all people have access to good, well-paying jobs by investing in care infrastructure and addressing persistent gender discrimination and systemic barriers to workforce participation, including pay inequity, by strengthening women's economic empowerment globally through the Gender Equity and Equality Action Fund that was announced last year, which is focused on advancing women's economic security around the world. We've also taken strides to prevent and respond to gender-based violence by working to reauthorize and expand the Violence Against Women Act, building on President Biden's leadership on that issue, by developing and strengthening comprehensive national and global policies aimed at addressing GBV, including by developing the first ever national action plan on gender-based violence, which is underway now. We've launched a global partnership to address online harassment and abuse on the margins of the Summit for Democracy, given the link between that issue and women's political participation. And we are addressing gender-based violence abroad, including sexual violence in conflict settings, and by updating our national plan to combat human trafficking. We're also working to protect, improve, and expand access to healthcare, including codifying the constitutional right in Roe and promoting women's healthcare at home and abroad, addressing the pernicious effects of health inequity, including by addressing the maternal mortality crisis here in the US, which has a disproportionate impact on Black and Native American women, and by strengthening the healthcare workforce abroad, which is disproportionately female, and addressing maternal morbidity and mortality globally. And finally, we've been advancing women's full participation in democracy, representation, and leadership. We've launched an initiative to advance women's leadership and political participation globally at the Summit for Democracy. And we've worked towards gender parity and diversity in leadership roles, which has really been a hallmark of the administration, which has reached gender parity in our cabinet for the first time ever, thanks to the president's commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. He's appointed a record number of women and people of color, including the first woman to serve as Treasury Secretary, the first woman to serve as the Director of National Intelligence, and the first Native American woman to serve in the cabinet. And we've been focused on promoting leadership of women and girls in peace processes, in national security and defense, in global health and humanitarian efforts, and in climate change tables. So we'll continue our efforts to implement this first ever whole of government strategy to advance gender equity and equality across both domestic and foreign policy work. And we look forward to doing it with partners, both inside and outside of government.
Rachel, thank you so much for your leadership and congratulations on all the progress in only 1 year. It's incredible. Laura, you also have vast global experience and you know firsthand the impact of women being empowered and in control of their future. In the past, you've talked about legal frameworks that can hinder women's progress, but when laws change, opportunities are created. So could you give us an example and shed some light on other barriers women currently face?
Yeah, and thank you for that question, Elizabeth. It's been one that I have been personally passionate about and one that UPS has made a top priority for advocacy. We started our advocacy efforts in the context of APEC discussions and then took it into the WTO to basically make the case that we want to help women be able to thrive in the global economy, but they can't thrive if they can't own property in their names. They can't open a bank account. They can't get a loan without a male co-signer, that they can't move freely, across borders or within a country or engage in certain kinds of economic activities. I will tell you, we have some of the most amazing UPS women drivers in our company, and there's still prohibitions on women being able to engage in certain kinds of activities like being a package car driver in certain countries. And so we wanted to be champions for changing those laws and regulations, because once you eliminate those barriers, you're enabling 50% of the global workforce to engage in amazing economic activity. I'm really proud of the fact that in the WTO, one of the important things that got accomplished at the end of the year was changes in the domestic regulation agreement that said you cannot discriminate in trade rules on the basis of gender. That was groundbreaking, because that is a foundation that women-owned businesses can stand on. There's a lot more work that needs to be done, because in making those WTO commitments, you also have to translate them into domestic laws and regulations, but we are a voice for that change. We're also a voice for saying, okay, if we want to show you the economic power that women represent in every country in which we serve them. We operate in 220 countries and territories, and we've made support for women-owned businesses wherever they are a top priority for our company. And we've done it in several ways. We have done it by supporting them with the financial resources and the training through an awesome program we've got that's called UPS Ignite, where we basically help women get engaged in more economic activity, giving them the resources. Elizabeth, we partner with We Connect International in this awesome program in the United Arab Emirates. As just one example, where we're really empowering women in the Middle East to have that access to the financial resources so that they can succeed. We're doing it in other ways as well, giving those all-important grants and additional financial support directly through a program that we've got that's called Proudly Unstoppable. We want to make every woman-owned business unstoppable in everything that they do. So we champion the changes in the laws. We give them the resources to be able to take their businesses to more markets around the world. And importantly, Rachel, I have to give this a call out. We partner with great government, partners like the U.S. government, working on ways that we can help not only give the resources that change the laws. One that comes to mind is the awesome program we're doing with the Department of State with the Academy of Women Entrepreneurs in Mexico is just one example. We're doing it in Vietnam. We're doing it in Nigeria. Anywhere there are women who need that help to be able to engage in more economic activity, we're making sure we're right alongside them, providing not only the financial resources, but that megaphone that says, change the laws, give women the opportunities, they will rise. And in turn, global economies will rise.
Wow, I love your passion, Laura. And I love working together in markets, the US, Canada, Germany, China, UAE. I mean, it's incredible. And similarly, getting to work with Microsoft and what you're doing in Australia and many other markets to create equal opportunities. But Kate, the pandemic has really accelerated the adoption of technology in many domains. What innovations have you seen in the tech space that have improved the lives of women and their communities? And how is Microsoft working to increase the number of women around the world with internet coverage?
Well, when we think about digital equity, we think about connectivity, but also skilling and affordable devices. And it's a little chicken and egg in a way. I mean, even for those who have an affordable broadband connection, if a lack of digital literacy or devices or other socioeconomic issues can persist as barriers to entry. If women and girls don't have access to broadband connectivity, they can't unlock digital skills. And if they don't have digital skills, then it's hard to realize the potential offered by connectivity. So access to broadband is critical. It's really, in some ways, like the electricity of the 21st century. Without a proper broadband connection, people can't run a business online, can't access telemedicine, can't take an online class. Students can't participate in remote education. And of course, we've seen that over the last few years with COVID. And so we've sought opportunities to work with with government, with nonprofits, with others in the private sector to help bridge the digital divide by addressing these issues in the specific context of gender equality. And so we're looking at how to deploy connectivity solutions and better access to opportunities and also to learning platforms to get the digital skills that are just so critical. And when you think about internet coverage, this issue is especially pronounced for women and girls, where we are not yet at gender parity for internet usage. The divide, for example, in least developed countries is like only 19% of women in least developed countries are using the internet, which is about 12 percentage points lower than men. So we have already undertaken several commitments. We have an airband initiative that's focused on bringing broadband to unconnected communities around the world. We've also partnered with USAID to bring internet access to more women around the world, and we have projects being deployed with our airband partners in Guatemala, in Ghana, India, Colombia, Kenya. Another great partnership that we have is we're collaborating with Unilever to support a new generation of female entrepreneurs. And we've launched an initiative there to deploy connectivity solutions to increase the number of women that can access and leverage the internet. And I think this is a good example of the power of partnerships, by bringing Microsoft's technology and bringing Unilever's in-market presence and their, such a strong footprint in market. The goal is really to increase digital access in a way that connects female entrepreneurs with the resources that they need to thrive in the modern economy. And you asked about innovations that are truly having an impact on the lives of women. And one initiative that we have done in a partnership with UNICEF is what we call the Learning Passport platform. And that's really has been focused on providing digital skills for girls and young women. And it was actually originally developed to help displaced young people, people on the move, continue their education, with the idea that if people are on the move, then their education should be on the move with them. But during COVID, we sort of pivoted and expanded Learning Passport to help facilitate learning at home, to help ensure continuity of formal education during the pandemic. So 7 countries are now deploying girl-centered content through the Learning Passport platform, which has been helpful and so critical, just given the acute impact that school closures during COVID has had on girls. So they're just a couple of examples of how innovations are helping in this space.
fascinating how you're working at so many different levels and so many different markets with so many different types of partnerships. It really shows what can be done when you're committed to impact. I have a couple more questions and we only have about 10 minutes. So in a couple of minutes each, I'd love to know first, tell us about of all the things that need to be done, and there's a lot of things that need to be done, but if you could wave a magic wand, what is one investment that you think women need most right now? So I'm going to start with, I know this is a hard question, but I'm going to start with Rachel, then Laura, and then Kate. So Rachel?
Well, it is hard, Elizabeth, to pick just one, but I will highlight the issue of care infrastructure, which has really been a priority of the administration. You know, of the many crises that the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated, as we talked about earlier, the caregiving crisis has really had a particularly dramatic impact. And while the pandemic put a bright light on this crisis, we know that this crisis isn't new. You know, across the world, even before the pandemic, women were responsible for nearly 3/4 of unpaid care work on average, which undermines their ability to participate in paid work. And they also make up the vast majority of the care workforce who have been underpaid and undervalued for far too long. So child care, elder care, home care, too often are inaccessible and unaffordable, while at the same time, care workers scramble to care for their own families, even as they take care of others. So the administration is facing this caregiving crisis head on, making care central to our plans, and of course took early steps to tackle the crisis in the US through the American Rescue Plan, the president's first legislative package, and the president has put forward an ambitious vision for strengthening and reinforcing our country's care infrastructure that we continue to fight for. The administration also supports greater investment in the care economy, not only at home, but globally as well. So to close gender gaps in the global economy, we have to recognize, reduce, and redistribute unpaid care work, to value, compensate, and protect care workers who are too often relegated to the informal economy and forced to work under poor conditions for low pay. And we need to encourage and support government investment in systems that provide the care infrastructure that is so crucial for women's economic participation and that all of us will need at some point in our lives. So that is why the Build Back Better World initiative that was announced at the G7, which will invest in infrastructure in low and middle income countries, has a focus on gender equality. We're committed to working with partners in the public and private sector at home and abroad to elevate this issue on the international agenda, to leverage our voice in bilateral and multilateral fora, as well as through our foreign assistance to encourage greater investment in the care economy by donor nations and host countries. This is not just a women's issue, as we know, it's an economic issue, and it's a critical pillar of our vision to build back better for all.
Thank you, Rachel. You certainly picked a really important one. And Laura, what's your pick?
Rachel, I have to echo that because I could not agree more. As a mother, I share that perspective that, you know, increasing that access to caregiving is really important, and making it affordable for that kind of support. The one other investment that I would add, and it builds on something that Kate said, is an investment in financial and literacy and digital fluency in women. When women are empowered with the ability to use technology to their benefit and know how to navigate the financial system to advance their ideas as entrepreneurs, I think women thrive and win. And that kind of investment will have a strong return on it.
Again, great points. Thank you, Laura. Kate?
Well, I've already touched on connectivity and skilling. So connectivity and skilling, you know, almost every job is going to require some level of digital fluency. And so, you know, connectivity and skilling, I think, is key. But it's not enough to invest in skilling alone. You know, if we think about improving livelihoods and helping women gain employment, it really requires a comprehensive approach. And one of the hurdles that we see women and girls face is often their unfounded belief that they can't do tech jobs or that they can't actually get the digital fluency to open up, new livelihoods and new job opportunities. And this is where we see, nonprofit partnerships are just so important, because it's not just about investing in the skills and training, but also working with nonprofits that are thinking about the wraparound services that are so important, whether it's caregiving, so that women can actually, attend the training in the first place, whether it's connecting them to a mentor so that they can see other women in a similar role, or coaching ahead of job interviews and things like that.
Okay, all great picks. It's hard not to be overwhelmed in this brave new world of ours. And yet there are rays of hope. So in 1 minute, what is giving you hope as we look to the future? One ray of sunshine. Rachel, maybe you can kick us off in a minute.
Sure. What is really giving me hope at this moment are the courageous women leaders around the world who are at the forefront of change. And at this time of year, we're preparing for the International Women of Courage Awards, which will take place in mid-March. This is an award ceremony that's now in its 15th year, in which the Secretary of State recognizes women from around the world who have demonstrated exceptional courage and leadership in advocating for peace, for justice, human rights, gender equality, often at great personal risk and sacrifice. Since the inception of this award in 2007, the U.S. has recognized more than 155 women from over 75 countries. These are women who are raising their voices in the face of dire odds and making change happen, and they reflect millions of other women that we can't recognize but want to, and they give me hope. I hope you will join us later this month to salute their courage and to support their clarion call for change.
That's wonderful, Rachel. We'll all be there. They're always inspiring stories that lift all of us up. So thank you for helping to lead on that. Kate, what inspiration can you share?
Well, I think one thing that's giving me hope is the increasingly collaborative approach between governments, the private sector, nonprofits, to try and solve some of these issues, which we all know, and we all, always say these issues are too massive for any one company or one government or one industry to tackle alone. I think taking a multi-stakeholder approach really allows us to learn from each other, to lean into the strengths of different organisations, to share successes, but perhaps even more importantly, share challenges. I think that sometimes the more valuable lessons come from our challenges. So I think just seeing more openness to collaborating in new and different ways. So I think that's probably what's giving me hope, as well as the power of women and girls around the world.
I love it, Kate. I mean, it doesn't happen without a solid ecosystem, and all of you are helping to lead this ecosystem. And I just hope on behalf of the rest of the world, how grateful we are. Laura, what was giving you hope right now?
So what's giving me hope right now is that when you look across the panoply of businesses that are out there, more and more businesses aren't just saying it, they're showing it. UPS is one example. We have the most amazing woman CEO. I am part of almost half women making up our executive leadership team, and almost half of our boards of directors are now women. If a company like UPS that had been traditionally in a male-dominant industry can be led by great women, that is powerful change in the works. And the second part, I know you said one ray of light and hope, but I also see the amazing he for she movement that's out there. That gives me incredible hope. There are more and more men that recognize when women are asking for a seat at the table, it's not us versus them, it's we. And more men are being champions along our side saying, yes, women need an equal seat at the table, equal opportunity to engage in the global economy, and they're right there alongside us. And that's how the world's going to change, when we do it together, because we're stronger united.
I love it. It's a call to action. Laura, Kate, Rachel, I am inspired. And we all need this right now because it can be very overwhelming. And we just all have to remember that we're not in this alone. There are ways for us to take action. There are ways for us to collaborate, to partner, to build public-private partnerships, leverage the incredible civil society infrastructure around the world, making sure that women are front and center in making decisions about them. So I know all of you do that every single day. And I do hope that we all think about ways we can take action, whether it's giving a woman business opportunity a chance to sell her products or services. We all have purchasing power. Women have $20 trillion in purchasing power under their control or influence. So we are powerful already. We just need to wield it and be comfortable leveraging it. And because when we do, everyone's better off. Families, communities, and we all know that that's true. We have ways to invest in each other. And so thank you for being sources of inspiration in this space, along with, of course, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, who continues to lead in this area fearlessly and proudly, and very proud to be a partner with all of you. Thank you. Turn it back over to the foundation.
Qualcomm for Good believes in the power of technology. We're also committed to responsible business, creating products in ways that don't harm the environment while working to protect privacy and secure data. For decades, Qualcomm has enabled people, transformed industries, and enriched lives. Now we're building on that legacy.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carol Jewell, the Executive Vice President, Chief Technology and Operating Officer at Synchrony. Excited to be here with you today. As we mark 2 years since the beginning of the pandemic and employment rebounds, it's clear that women are still struggling. There are nearly 1.1 million fewer women in the labor force since February of 2020, while men have fully regained jobs they had lost due to the pandemic during the same period, according to the National Women's Law Center. The pandemic has laid bare the challenges around childcare issues and school closures, disproportionately impacting women. And in January, at the height of the Omicron outbreak, over 1 million men joined the labor force, compared to only 39,000 women. Business must lean into solutions to help bring women back into the economic engine and keep them in the workforce. There is too much at stake not to. And in this session, we will explore what's needed to get more women back to work. This includes flexibility, childcare support, career development, and much more. And I'm honored to be joined by my esteemed colleagues and co-panelists here. First and foremost, Glenn Williams, who's the Chief Diversity Officer and Vice President of Human Resources at Qualcomm. Spring Lacey, Vice President and Head of Learning and Development at Prudential. And Julie Lucas, Divisional Vice President of Human Resources and Technology at Abbott. All right, my friends here, let's jump right in because this is a hot topic and I think we have a lot to talk about, a lot to share, and these three great companies are doing amazing work in this space. So let's jump in. Right now, we're facing, what we'll call a double dose of workforce challenges. There are too many people without jobs, and there are too many jobs without people to fill them. I'd like each of you to start with an overview of what's going on in your workforce generally and the unique challenges you're seeing facing women in the workplace. So Spring, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you to the Chamber for allowing me to be a part of this important conversation. I think from an employer perspective, there are several challenges that we are experiencing as it relates to talent. And I think it's within the context of what we've been going through from a pandemic perspective, right? I think the pandemic has caused people to reevaluate their own values, what they value in life, what they value in relationships, what they value in careers, and with that, what they're expecting from their employers. And so employees are voting with their feet and either walking away from careers altogether or moving to places where they can have a more value aligned quality of life. And oftentimes that's been away from kind of city centers where work has been gathered in the past. And if they are staying engaged, again, they're expecting extreme levels of flexibility from their employers. And so the flexibility that allows them to care for the things that they care about. And so the Great Resignation, I think, is what we've all become familiar with, has really become an all-out war for talent. And I'm sure that this is familiar to each of you, both as employers and as employees of employers who are probably just like me, getting all the calls from people on LinkedIn, because there is a real need for people to fill these important roles. And so what does that mean for us at Prudential? And so some things that we've done, we've spent a lot of time listening to employees over the past 2 years, a lot of time. And when employees said overwhelmingly they weren't comfortable coming back to the workplace, we didn't come back to the workplace, right? We are a service business, and we had proven time and time again that we can be highly productive at home. And it wasn't worth it for the company to disrupt that in order for people to come back into the office. We are actually not back in the office. I'm not at home because I'm a hybrid employee. I'm at home because we don't go back until March 16th is our first official return to the work date, which will be the 2-year anniversary of the last time we were all in the office. A lot of that decision to delay our return has been guided by things like what are local school districts where we have offices doing, recognizing that it's really difficult for primary caregivers, who oftentimes are women, to leave and come to work when you actually have to facilitate virtual learning happening at home. And so I think Prudential took a really conservative and employee-centric and caregiver-centric, again, most cases women, approach to when we return to the workplace. When we do return, we're going to have flexibility like we'd never seen at our company. We were pretty traditional when it came to kind of coming to the office for your typical 9 to 5 before the pandemic. And headed back, we actually, in most places, don't have assigned offices. There's actually not capability for every employee to come back because we really are leaning into this notion of a flexible workplace, because again, we've proven for the past 2 years that the work can get done for the work that we do in a way that is flexible in response to our employees. It also, as an employer, allows us access to a more geographically dispersed talent pool, right? And so we're not just looking for people who sit in and around Newark and New Jersey, or in and around Hartford, and where we have people centers. We can hire people from wherever they are, which gives us greater access to talent. And again, from an employee perspective, it allows us to be responsive to what people are asking for in the market. And again, primary caregivers are demanding flexibility from their employers, and it's given us a chance to do that. Another thing that we've seen internally that we're responding to is this pandemic, on top of lots of other challenges that have happened and regular challenges that happen in people's lives, has caused a lot of pressure for our employees. And we're seeing mental health requests from our employee assistance program be higher than they've been before. And so the company launched a mental health initiative to really help raise awareness of mental health, help managers to support their employees, and really directing us as employees to the resources that we have available. And so a lot of things, I call them silver linings of the pandemic. And this is a way for me personally to deal, right, and to cope with all that's been happening. But I think there's a lot of silver linings that we'll see in the workplace. And there are things like greater flexibility, greater support for mental health, greater support for caregivers in this. And so I'm hoping that as we move back to a new normal, that some of these things stay in place, because I know personally I appreciate them, and I don't know how I worked before the pandemic, and I'm certainly not looking to go back to some of those ways. Some of the things that we're thinking about at Prudential.
Thanks, Spring. That is great. I echo some of your comments. I don't know how I worked before. I'm a mother of 3 school-age kids, and I had the challenges of so many working families through the pandemic and have adapted, but the flexibility that my employer, Synchrony, we're offering our employees is really, I think, critical. Number one, from a workforce retention perspective, but also just dealing with all of the challenges of managing children, mental health issues, all of those things that weave in together. And we have a workforce that's over 60% female. And so it's an interesting dynamic. So let's jump over to Glenn. Let's talk a bit. It's a similar question. The unique challenges facing women in the workplace, and how Qualcomm is addressing that.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here, and thanks to the Chamber for also allowing us this forum. I don't want to repeat a lot of the stuff that Spring said, so I'll just highlight a couple of points. But I think that she laid out really well what the environment is like, especially with the need for increased flexibility, the war on talent. We work in the tech field. So there's constantly, battles for who is actually going to get limited resources, limited talent. And if you are not being flexible, if you're not evolving, you're going to be left behind. So that's what we kind of saw throughout the entire pandemic. We also did surveys to listen to our employees to figure out what they needed when they were comfortable. And similar to Spring, we're not completely back in the office yet either, because we've been listening to our employees. So this month is our return, and I use return loosely because we are going to be in a hybrid environment for the foreseeable future. Depending on your manager, it could be, as much as 3 days a week in the office to as little as, a day or two every couple of weeks in the office, right? Really allowing our managers to have that flexibility. And unlike Spring, where they have a service, a service-based company, we are a hardware company. We also do some software. We do a lot of patents in innovation. Where we weren't sure how we could do our work from a virtual environment. And a lot of times pre-pandemic, we said you had to be in the office, everything has to be done in the office. And then the pandemic forced us to learn a new way to do our work, and actually productivity went up. So I would say the story that we learned from that is that maybe just because we think that things can be done a different way, sometimes they can. The one thing that I would like to kind of touch on, that's something that I think that we did and was key in us keeping our attrition rates down, was we also provided mental health support. So every single employee at Qualcomm could get up to 20 free counseling sessions. And I know as a person who used some of those counseling sessions, they were really, really useful. Just to talk about stuff. We're all going through a completely different environment than we're probably used to. And that was something that I found very useful. And I think a lot of our employees have found useful as well. So one of the things that I'm really proud of is that we haven't seen the Great Recession hit us yet. Our female attrition has actually stayed flat from our pre-pandemic level and actually went down a little bit. But now, as we're transitioning back to work, we have to make sure that we keep that up.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. So maybe, Julie, let's talk a little bit about how you're addressing this at Abbott.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Carol. And kudos to the Chamber for such a diverse panel. I think we've got some similarities and some differences here. At Abbott, we recognize that there's a lot of value that comes from working in person, especially when it comes to things that are really important for us as a business. Innovation, collaboration, development, our company culture. As an essential business, making COVID-19 tests and other critical healthcare products, Abbott never closed. And we had to create programming in order to support workers who couldn't do their jobs at home. So really for us, it's about caring deeply about our people and knowing that one size doesn't fit all. Flexible work is super important, and we have lots of flexible programs in order to help our employees meet their personal and their professional needs. So even before the pandemic started, we were offering flex work opportunities. But I think more specifically talking about women, our observation is that women are really reassessing the role of work in their lives. Similar to what Spring was saying, I think that women are feeling that they don't want their their personal and their family priorities to be seen as place barriers. As a mother of 4 children, school-age children, I know the struggle of having to drop my kids off at school while I'm on the phone, trying to have a staff meeting. And I think that for women, it's really important to see other women addressing those challenges and recognizing it's not a barrier, that you don't need to feel like your path is limited because you have to prioritize your personal and family, stressors and work. We really focus on making the workplace a supportive environment for women to succeed in their current roles and rise to new ones. I think as human beings, it's always important for us to see people that are in a similar situation to us or look like us in roles that we aspire to, and that really helps us feel like we can do that. And here at Abbott, we see women in leadership positions. As a matter of fact, women run businesses at Abbott that account for over half of our corporate revenue. So you can see that here. And we believe that our culture is critical to supporting, retaining, and promoting women and helping them achieve their aspirations in the workplace. So for us, real key is to have a workplace where everyone feels included and they have flexibility and that the work that they do matters. Particularly at Abbott, which is a company that's innovating healthcare technology to improve the lives of people and help them, feel healthy and have a sense of dignity. Sorry, my lights are going off. All of that really is, I think, well supported with our 2030 sustainability and workplace goals, which are really designed to help build a diverse workforce and innovate for the future of, the future workforce for tomorrow. Some of those important goals to us are really achieving gender balance across our global management team with at least 45% female representation. And then additionally, because of our healthcare view on the world and science and technology coming together so strongly to make a difference in the world, we really want to also achieve a gender balance in STEM roles with at least 45% female representation there as well.
That is great. Thank you. Thank you, Julie. I'm going to steal a little bit from Spring here. The silver linings, as terrible as the pandemic has been, the silver linings of the things we are now talking about in these very, very broad forums. This is the United States Chamber of Commerce, and we're talking about mental health in the workforce. We're talking about flexibility. We're talking about women in diverse representation. I mean, if there's anything that comes out of this is we've changed the nature of the conversation about work, which I think is hugely exciting as we think about leaning into the future and when we fully come out of the pandemic here. And I think leaning into that, over the course of the pandemic, we've had to pivot to try new approaches to enhance the employee experience, to help our employees to adjust, to adapt. One of the areas across Synchrony is we took, as the technology and operations leader, Agile is a big part of how we operate, but we applied those principles to our business to really drive speed and prioritization of decision making. And one of the areas we applied it was obviously, I think many of us thinking back to the summer of 2020 and how challenging we knew that summer was going to be for all of our employees with children, that there was no camps, there was no summer jobs, there was just this 3 months of what am I going to do with my kid while I try to work. And using Agile principles, we actually designed a really, really robust summer camp program. We had over 3,700 campers that participated over the 8 weeks of the summer, and we did that through an Agile test and learn process. And really said, listening to our employees, what do you need? How can we help your children? How can we help relieve the stress that you're having every day as you're trying to keep your kids engaged and safe at home and do your job? And it really was about taking things that were working in one part of the business and applying them to a new problem. So I'd love to hear from all of you. What are some of the new approaches you've taken as an employer? So Glenn, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, of course. And I think that the one thing that the pandemic has highlighted is the need for innovation try new things, to do things a different way. And I think that it expands everything from our hiring all the way through our, how we conduct business. One of the things that we have really kind of focused on when we're trying to, once again, get people back to work is hiring more remote positions. I think the Spring brought it up earlier that a lot of people have moved from what we call like the city centers into other parts of the country, or even sometimes other parts of the world. We've actually had employees move. We're in San Diego. We're based in San Diego. We've had employees move to Mexico to be closer to family, and we can either A, lose those employees, or B, we can make our work work for them. And then it also helps us to recruit from a broader base of possible employees as well. So I think that's been our biggest thing is really embracing this remote work environment and seeing how we can still be a productive company even when everybody is not in the same place. Then what I would say another kind of big change that we made here is ensuring that there are still development opportunities no matter where you're at. And in fact, we've really increased our development opportunities. Before we had like a few partners who we worked with that kind of helped with our development of our employee base. And it was really limited. I think that because things are virtual now, we were able to expand on a lot of our development opportunities. We partnered with different partners around the globe, and really made sure that people felt engaged with their work. And I think that that's another reason why we may have not seen the same attrition that has kind of befallen others in our industry. Really making sure that our employees feel engaged.
Great. Thank you, Glenn. And maybe, Julie, some new approaches at Abbott. Anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, sure, Carol. It's similar to what you were saying about the principles that you guys use to make decisions. Abbott has 4 key values that we really anchor to. It's pioneering, achieving, enduring, and caring. And as a mother and caregiver, I can tell you that during the pandemic, that caring value just really showed through for me as an employee, and I think for many, many people. Abbott had to quickly pivot. When the pandemic started, we knew that there were a lot of our employees that are responsible for children, for elders, and we needed to be able to provide them with better ways to manage against those responsibilities. For me personally, trying to manage the conflicting Zoom calls where like my kindergartner's Zoom call was conflicting with my Abbott Zoom call, that was like a real challenge for me. But Abbott provided us through our wellness programs with 2 hours per child of free tutoring. And that was an unbelievable benefit for us, especially when it came to like my teenagers' math homework, just trying to manage some of those personal things that just, it really showed through. And I think that it really helps address some of the problems and challenges that women face disproportionately, which is that balancing of the children and the care of children and family members. We've seen daycare shutdowns. You mentioned that, different school districts are going virtual and some of them are in person, and that doesn't always balance out with your work schedule either. So as parents, we have to be resilient. And it's important that the company provide flexibility that helps support those parents as they're dealing with those different challenges. So we expanded our flexible work options. We also expanded our leave policies, paid sick time to handle childcare and elder care needs for both men and women, because we believe that it's important that we shift those responsibilities to a better gender balance as well. We worked with our government agencies locally to ensure that at headquarters, We had daycare available to really support those essential workers who were coming in to deliver the world with the health and wellness that they needed.
Thank you. And Spring, what about you at Prudential? Any new approaches you'd like to share as an employer?
Yeah, a couple things. One, we did some of the same things that you, Carol, and Glenn did around working more agile, right? And agile existed in our technology organization in a really embedded way. And over the last 2 years, those of us who don't work in technology have really come to appreciate agile principles and how working in empowered teams in a more nimble way gets you not only a greater product, but it's highly engaging, it's customer focused, and all those good things that we like to talk about. But we also did some of the things that Julie just talked about in terms of supporting our employees who are at home trying to figure out what this balance looks like. So we did have allocated time for tutoring. We had COVID time off, either to care for family members or to get vaccinations. So there was a lot from a total rewards and wellness perspective that we did. But one thing that I want to note is not about any policy or business practice, but it's about culture and leadership, right? I've been at companies where those policies existed and I might not have been comfortable taking advantage of them because the culture didn't necessarily support what the policies may have dictated, right? And so I remember I was on a call with our CHRO, who's my boss's boss. It's a high stake call, right? This person reports to the CEO. And my son came wandering by the camera and I did the thing that we do, which is like try to like discreetly shoo him away. And my CHRO said, "Who's that?" And I was like, "It's my son." So my son came over, he said hello, it satisfied his curiosity, he went and played. But just that moment of my senior leader in HR letting me know that it's okay. Your kids aren't disappearing, your pets aren't disappearing. And when pets bark in the background, they weren't made to feel bad about it. We all introduced our dogs to each other at some point, right? And so I think practices and policies are important, and we did all of that. But I think the empathy that our leaders showed and letting us know that it was okay and that they acknowledged what we were balancing went a tremendous way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that leading by example, we saw into each other's homes in ways that we never, ever imagined. You see someone at work and you know them at work, but their work environment, their children, their animals, you get to know people in a very different way. And I think that is to share another silver lining of the pandemic. So Spring, let's talk a little bit, switching gears. Employers need to move with urgency to address the growing skills gap and provide workers with opportunities to develop. What does that look like at Prudential?
I get super excited about this because it's what I get to do every day for the company. It's literally the challenge I get to come to work to try to solve. What I will say is that Prudential has recently gone through a whole new visioning and strategy process. We've got a new vision, a new strategy, and it's global and it's clear and it's succinct. And what it provides for all of us is a true north when it comes to who are we serving as our customers and where's our business going. What that means from a skills perspective is that I get to be very, very clear in my work as head of learning and development about the skills that we need in order to get us there. And then I'm able to assess where we have those skills and where there are gaps and really be intentional about what learning looks like. We have a lot of people who love to learn, but if you're going to invest time in a moment where we don't have a lot of time, making sure that we're giving employees and guiding them along their career mobility journey by letting them know exactly what skills we're going to need in the future of Prudential to heighten their opportunities for mobility. So I'm super excited about that work. And some of the things that we've done really focus on democratizing access to opportunities and democratizing access to development across the company, both for women and for people of color. If you're like me, you've gotten an email announcement or you were called before COVID into a conference room and it was announced that someone got a job. And you said to yourself, I didn't know that job existed. I think I can do that job. And actually, I would have liked that job. And a lot of this movement of opportunity happened and it wasn't transparent. And so a lot of what we're doing, in addition to identifying the skills so that people can be intentional about their careers, are building systems and processes. And internally, we have this really great platform we've developed called the Talent Marketplace, where employees can go in and they can see the skills gaps that the company is looking for compared to the skills that they have. They can access learning, and whether it's on-demand learning that they can do in their own time, or perhaps signing up for an academy. We have a Scrum Master Academy, a Developer Academy to fill a skills gap. And then they have opportunity based on a revised talent acquisition process that we have to apply for roles that are open in the company. What we want to make sure is that women and people of color and other populations that haven't traditionally had access to these opportunities because they might have been outside of networks have access to the opportunities. If I can make it so no one's ever surprised by an announcement and has the opportunity to apply for that role, I feel like we're winning. And so there's a lot of business and processes again on the background, but I can't emphasize how much culture and leadership is going to play into making sure that we have the culture that allows people to step into the processes that we're creating.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Businesses, leaning more into that are increasingly seeing flexibility as the new workplace currency. We've hit on this a little bit, but I'll say from personal experience, 85% of our employees at Synchrony surveyed say they want some form of work from home post-pandemic. And, that really gives people the opportunity to manage their schedules, think about their job differently, meet their commitments personally. So Julie, Abbott offers flexible options to help employees find success at work and at home. Tell us a bit more about that and really the educational and development programs that can help women further their careers while providing a really supportive culture.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. I think it's a great transition from the last question to this one. So first of all, when it comes to flexibility, we think that there are great benefits to being in the office together, especially as it relates to development and especially with women. But we also understand the importance of flex work, and we've long had options like job sharing, compressed work weeks, flexible scheduling, and we even have an employee resource group that is dedicated to this called the Flex Network. We anticipate during the pandemic that we were going to have to respond to questions on flexibility from employees. And knowing that, we took the time to go back and look at our flex work policies and see how we could make those easier for managers and employees to use. And really, we wanted to focus on that relationship between the managers and the employees. Having a broad scale policy that you peanut butter spread doesn't make sense for everybody. You need, as Spring was saying, that empathy. And where you get that is really from your manager. We did a lot of work with our manager population last year in a program that we call Leading with Impact, where we really went hard in teaching our managers how to make sure that you're seeing your employees, that you're developing them, that you're seeing them and empathizing with them. And on the heels of that, we have a very strong foundation for driving that flexibility conversation really to the managers to have with their employees and be empowered to make some of those decisions about flex work. Each manager was encouraged to have a conversation with their team members and really understand what did they need from a work perspective and a personal perspective to make schedules work for them. And we value that open and honest feedback from both sides on what is and isn't working. From a flexibility mindset when it comes to development and action. We did a lot of listening throughout our organization as we returned to the office, and things that we heard like predominantly is I want to be developed. So we launched a few months ago a program called Free You, and really this is intended to eliminate barriers to education. It is for eligible employees here in the United States. It allows to help employees achieve their bachelor's degree without having a huge financial burden and having the barrier of having to go in classroom or have a specific schedule that might not fit with your work and your priorities. So the program is really intended to assist people who don't yet have their bachelor's degree. But it's if you're an eligible employee in the U.S., you can pursue the path of the educational path that you want to pursue. Really, the way the program is set up is that it provides you with your tuition, it pays for your books and academic advising, and every one of the students that's involved in the program has a success coach. We have one individual in the program. Her name is Lacey. She's a field clinical engineer for our medical devices organization. She's a busy mom. She has a 12-year-old son, and she has wanted to get her bachelor's degree for like 20 years. She has an associate's degree, but being able to work and raise your son has really limited her as far as flexibility is concerned. And so this program now gives her the opportunity to earn her bachelor's degree. So she's studying she's pursuing her business major right now with the aspiration to get her MBA. And we're super proud of that program and the access that it gives our people. When we look at the program, we have great enrollment numbers. About half of enrollment is women, and about that are people from diverse backgrounds. So in addition to that program, Abbott is a very diverse business. We have so many different lines of business that really you can be in the driver's seat when it comes to your career. You can even have multiple careers at Abbott because there are so many different diverse businesses. So really for us about that relationship with your manager and making sure that you've got the schedule that you need, that you have flexibility to manage your personal and business priorities. But then the flexibility is then built through and woven into our programs as well, recognizing that people are extraordinarily busy and everybody has different needs. So that's our approach.
That's fantastic. I feel as if every time we're talking here, there's another silver lining, that the relationships, I do believe, between managers and employees blossomed during the pandemic, just out of the necessity. And as hard as digital connection has been at times, it has enabled a different way for employees to connect with their leaders, which hopefully we all hope carries well on past the pandemic. I think we're getting close on time here, so we're gonna pass one more question over to Glenn. And this is, this one I think is really important for this panel. Pew Research reveals that the gender pay gap has remained steady during the pandemic, but I know many of us are working towards closing that. Qualcomm, for example, has set forth public laws on DEI, linked executive comp to these targets. Can you share a bit more about that with us, Glenn?
Yeah, of course, and actually everything kind of ties together. So when we talk about development, when we talk about flexibility, when we talk about retention, those all kind of go into our executive goals. So one of the goals that we had that isn't like listed as a public goal, one of the things that when I started 3 years ago, it was to make sure that we're being as transparent as possible. So that's why now Qualcomm releases its EEO1 data, when previously we didn't. We also have a pay equity statement that we release, and we do an analysis every year to actually look and make sure that there isn't any discrepancies. And we do that globally, not just in the US, because now we're a global company. We have places in EMEA as well as India and the rest of Asia. We make sure that our women and men, as well as in the US, our majority populations and our underrepresented minorities are paid equally. And then when we talk about our goals, we do have representation goals where we want to make sure that we are increasing the population of women and underrepresented minorities here at Qualcomm. But we also wanted to make sure that we're not just hiring people into the lower end, the junior level roles. So we actually have goals around leaders and making sure that we are hiring leaders into these various roles. And that kind of goes back to this whole development conversation that we were having, and really making sure that our women and our underrepresented minorities have opportunities to be developed externally with some of the programs that I mentioned earlier. We also have unlimited vacation time. So if people do need to take time off for to take a course or to go to a conference, they can do that. As well as internally, a lot of our leaders have goals where they have to have stretch assignments, and they have to have these stretch assignments be available to diverse individuals. So I know we're coming up on time, but I think that the work that all three of the companies are doing has been really amazing, and I think if we continue this, we will help to kind of close that gap of women in the workplace.
Thank you. And I know there's so much more we can discuss, but that's all the time we have for this session. Thank you to Glenn and Spring and Julie for sharing your thoughtful insights. Your perspectives, your best practices emphasize the fact that supporting and keeping women in the workplace is so critically necessary. From flexibility to skills and training to advancing D&I, we collectively can and will do more. A huge thank you to the Chamber for having us all here on this very important topic, and thank you all for tuning in today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kim Jones, and I lead the Talent Strategy and People Experience Center of Expertise at PwC. I am really happy to be with you to share how we've embedded care at the core of our people experience, especially during this challenging time. To take a step back, I want to tell you a personal story about why this topic is so near to my heart. The love of my life unexpectedly passed away when I was just 25 years old. My husband of a year and a half died suddenly from what I've since learned is called silent heart disease, meaning there are no outward symptoms prior to a massive and sudden heart attack. He was 26 years old. In the blink of an eye, as you can imagine, my life turned upside down. At such a young age, I found myself to be a widow, mending a very broken heart, all while feeling I needed to keep up responsibilities at work. At the time, I was grateful to be working for a firm, PwC, that truly prioritized showing care for me. And still to this day, I'm blown away by the amount of support that I received from my colleagues, and I was able to take advantage of a leave of absence benefit for several months and then sort of ease my way back into work at my own pace. The care that I was shown during that time in my life really sparked my interest in giving back to others much more deeply. So today I am honored to lead the people experience at the very same PwC that I was with back when my life changed forever. So now, fast forward to life at PwC in 2020. When the pandemic hit, I knew the type of supportive benefits that helped me decades ago would be more important than ever for our 55,000 employees. So in March of 2020, me and my team, we quickly sprang to action. We began to roll out expanded benefits to support our people's mental, financial, and emotional well-being. We started with mental health resources, including coaching, therapy, group sessions, and meditation tools at no cost to our employees. As a mother, I knew we had to do something quickly about the additional stress the pandemic was causing our working parents and caregivers. So we doubled our dependent care reimbursements to $2,000 annually, and we provided discounts on childcare services, tutoring support, and financial aid guidance. We also introduced a new leave of absence program that allowed our workers time away for up to 6 months while still receiving 20% of their pay. Similar to my own experience decades ago, our employees were encouraged to ease back into a full schedule at their own pace after their leave. So as time went on, in the heaviest days of the pandemic, the lines between work and home became increasingly fuzzy, and we noticed that employees were working longer hours and foregoing vacation time as recreational travel came to a halt. So in response, we emphasized to our people the value of taking time off to recharge, and we incentivized vacations with a bonus of up to $1,000 when an employee took a week off up to 4 times a year. Additionally, we introduced a Fridays Your Way program, which encouraged employees to focus on personal needs, uninterrupted work, or volunteering on Friday afternoons. And we distributed a special thank you bonus in recognition of the year's challenges and our employees' committed response. So then in the fall, as other companies began requiring employees to go back to the office, we became the first in our profession to offer fully virtual roles to nearly all our employees, which allowed them to live anywhere and work from anywhere in the continental US. We knew that our employees valued flexibility and choice. It's all about optionality more than ever. So we have continued to listen, and we recently formally transitioned to a hybrid work model. Since then, we've been working to make sure people have access to resources, mentoring, inclusive experiences, the types of experiences that they need to thrive in this hybrid environment. Now, looking ahead, we believe the hybrid model is here to stay. And as the world around us continues to change, we have to continue leading with passion and with care, keeping our people's experience top of mind. And that is what I wake up every day aiming to do. So thank you all for your time, and enjoy the rest of the forum.
Good afternoon. Very excited to join this esteemed panel of women to have a conversation about women, caregiving, and some of the really foundational things that are happening in this pandemic, post-pandemic environment. Please join me in welcoming Helen Ediosun, CEO and founder of Care Academy, Amy Goyer, caregiving expert from AARP, and Priya Krishnan, Senior Vice President of Client Relations and Sales Operations at Bright Horizon. So panelists, welcome. We've all heard so much about the Great Resignation and women quitting their jobs at higher rates than men during the pandemic, and now as we wind down. We understand that we're at a pivotal moment of unprecedented dialogue around caregiving, around the burden of work in the home, about different work environments. And we just heard that the panel before us talking about that optionality and the need for flexibility moving forward. So I wanted to start off today's discussion to really think about caregiving and what you're seeing out in the community, the impact to caregivers based on what's been going on the last couple of years. Maybe Helen, you could kick us off.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. I think the technology that I'm really excited about, and I may be biased in terms of my approach in thinking about this, but it's the technology that has emerged in this pandemic, and as we get to the endemic stage, right, that builds on capacity of caregivers, of women. We saw a 30-year high. We basically reverted back in terms of the attrition of women from the workforce. And I think we have to be as emboldened about opportunities to empower women to return, right? Whether that is providing them with access to affordable childcare and caregiving overall for the entire continuum, whether that is also just educational resources in terms of how to care. And so what I'm really excited about is any resource that provides women access to flexibility and the capacity building to re-enter the workforce.
Really exciting stuff, Helen. Amy, your thoughts, and then maybe Priya.
Amy, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I thought I was told I would be automatically unmuted. Sorry. What I was trying to say was that at AARP, we're focusing on family caregivers. And we fielded our last survey right before the pandemic in 2020. And at that point, we knew that 6 out of 10 family caregivers are working, 61% are women. And we also know that then during the pandemic, many more women were thrust into caregiving roles who were not already in that space. Many left the workplace in order to care for loved ones at home and keep them safe. We know that they were trying for more work flexibility, and we think this is perhaps one of the good things that will come out of the pandemic, is that these flexible work options are making a huge difference for family caregivers. It makes it much easier for them to take care of loved ones who are living with them or who live nearby, or to have that time to make that call to the doctors, or run to a doctor appointment with a loved one. So we're starting to see that the stress and the additional, caregiving is extremely stressful, but you added the pandemic on it. You had people who were isolated and could not see their loved ones, or they were with them 24/7. It was kind of, the two ends of the range, because they didn't want anyone coming in the home to help care for them. They wanted to keep them safe. So I think that overall, the changes that we're seeing as a result of the pandemic, many more caregivers are now going to be online. We saw that about 6 in 10 caregivers had gone online to help with caregiving before the pandemic. I think those numbers are probably going to go up.
Yeah. So from our perspective, I'll just add a little bit. I agree with everything both Helen and Amy said, but I would add potentially the positive that came out of this was the recognition of the fact that, caregiving and the conversation around caregiving got normalized, because all of our lives are on screens and people can actually see what's going on, children walking into the room, a cat sitting through a meeting. And so while there is the exhaustion is real, the fact that the nature of care changed. So it wasn't just the fact that it was traditional caregiving, you were working from home, children were at home, schools had shut down, they were going into hybrid, going back into normal. So it was also the consistent change around the caregiving needs, and then worrying about elderly who you can see in a non-vaccinated world, etc. But that was one element of the stress. Work had changed, which was the second element of the stress. And then the third was, when was this going to end? There was no line of sight, and hence the exhaustion was high. The good in all of this is, whether it's employers or women, employees in general, I think the conversation is incredibly normalized, and people are paying more attention to this than historically have ever done. So I see that as the positive that came out of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I realized I failed to introduce myself. So for those of you watching, my name is Susan Garfield. I'm EY's Chief Public Health Officer and co-director of our Center for Health Equity. And one of the other things I noticed, and it has dimensions from all of the different things that you said, was caregiving wasn't only something that happened in the home over the last couple of years, that in workplaces, people needed different types of engagement with their colleagues, with their bosses, with their employees, as the environment was so unusual and stressful. And I think that we're taking that concept of caregiving to be more universally applied in different settings where we find ourselves, which I think is also another positive thing that's coming out of the pandemic. So one of the things that I find really interesting, and Helen, you touched on this, is technology's role in supporting caregiving. And we talked about caregiving being more online than it ever has been. I was wondering if you saw other technological advancements or supports for either caregivers or the way care is being delivered. Amy, maybe you could start us off, and then Priya, and then Helen.
Right. Well, right prior to the pandemic, again, when we did our latest survey, 6 in 10 caregivers had gone online. The most common thing was to find services for their loved one. About 30% had done that. Getting prescriptions filled, ordering groceries, getting videos and training on how to be a caregiver, those tasks, shared calendars, ride services. But one of the key areas was connecting with other caregivers. And caregiving is extremely isolating because we tend to, you focus on who you're caring for and then your job, and then there's not room for much else. And we find that caregivers do much better when they're connecting with other caregivers. We started a Facebook group for family caregivers just about 6 months before the pandemic, and it just grew in leaps and bounds. We have over 8,500 members now, and I moderate the group. And what I'm seeing, it's like gives me a real insight into how important it is for those caregivers to be connected. They're not going to in-person support groups, although some of them have started up again. So I think that was one of the more growth areas during the pandemic, this connecting for personal support, problem solving, venting, getting that help from another caregiver that nobody else can provide. The other thing is the monitoring technology. We see a lot more coming into the marketplace, video programs, comprehensive systems where you have a video, you have, verbal, auditory, microphone connections, you have motion sensors, automatic fall detectors that are powered by radar so that they don't have to wear a device around their neck or on their wrist. So we see a lot more options with that. And during the pandemic, I think many caregivers put those in place because they weren't able to go see their mom and dad every day. The vast majority of caregivers care for people at home. So these kinds of technologies are really helpful in a home setting. I think those are going to continue, again, to be used more and more. The other piece was the socialization. So we have had our loved ones we're caring for who were increasingly isolated, and older adults tend to be isolated anyway, and then the pandemic on top of it. So people got very creative, and more older adults in particular were motivated to learn how to use video chat in some way, or how to use a smart speaker to call someone, or be in touch more, especially with the visual contact. So I think those are some of the big growth areas we've seen lately, in addition to care coordination, which is one of the things people say they have the hardest time with. Setting up, just time savers like ordering groceries and that type of thing. And healthcare. Obviously, telehealth took off like crazy during the pandemic. And we, ARP created a whole section on our website just to help people understand how to do telehealth. And people became much more proficient at it. So we see that again is going to be another silver lining with the pandemic going forward, that even the doctors, the healthcare systems saw the benefits for it. And for people like my parents who are homebound, it would have made things so much easier.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, such great points. And the detail you provide talks to the kind of different layers that technology is having in supporting both caregivers, changes in care paradigms, and new healthcare delivery systems. You mentioned telehealth and other monitoring technologies. So it really is multifaceted. Priya, Helen, and anything to add on to that?
I mean, I would have, I found it fascinating as Amy was talking with the elements that the community aspects definitely something that's come through, even though it was an incredibly isolating time. I think there's almost shared solidarity and this notion of it is a shared experience, even though we're individual and, in our caregiving responsibility. So technology definitely played a role there. And whether it was you're the primary caregiver or you were receiving it or were looking for it. The second aspect, as again, as both as a provider of care, one of the areas that we've seen a high degree of proliferation in is the gig economy workforce. So how do you create almost a structural shift in terms of part-time, caregiving opportunities, which we saw through our Saraswati platform, or what we were doing in the elder care space. So it's almost like the proliferation of a gig workforce thanks to technology. And the third and the most interesting aspect, which is like completely diverse from anything Amy said, was, we've realized that almost everyone's become a tech native, and whether it is the caregiver or the consumer, unlike the elderly who Amy was talking about, and it's fascinating for me because I saw this with my father and my father-in-law. They were learning all these new gadgets. But because people are tech natives, I think this gravitation towards the customer experience, which I'm sure Helen can speak really actively to. It's almost an imperative now that you create that experience as you move along.
No, you're absolutely right. I was smiling when you were saying tech natives. I remember my mom telling me at one point during the pandemic that she feels like a technology refugee, being kind of forced into a new area. And I think it helps us think about this question of technology and digital divide and access, and making sure we're recognizing different levels of technology literacy and otherwise as we roll out some of these interventions. Helen, anything to add on this point?
Yeah, I think Pew has done a really marvelous job just in terms of changing our paradigm of thinking about how people utilize technologies. And what I'll caveat in terms of digital divide is that I think people tend to see that in a very black and white sort of, very sort of in a very non-nuanced sort of way. And what we actually find is that whether you're talking about, older adults, or you're talking about certain different segments of the, total American population, people are utilizing technology. They're just utilizing them in different ways. Our approach at Care Academy, we always talk about accessibility, right? It's not the idea that you build something and people come, but how do you build towards a population? Assume that we're all just respectively utilizing different types of technologies. It's about how, if we're building for a population, how do we approximate the experiences that they're having? One of the things I love citing is the fact that we know that older adults, and this cross segments with a lot of the folks who utilize a platform like Care Academy, are the highest users and adopters of platforms like Facebook, right, over the last 15 years. So knowing that, as a consumer, your users are gravitating towards a certain technology, how do you approximate even the experiences that they're getting from an experience like that one? So what I'll challenge, internally at Care Academy, we do this a lot, but throughout, as we think about technology and adoption of technologies, how do we create opportunities for access by making sure we're as close as possible to the folks that we're touching, because there's a lot of nuance when we talk about sort of what the digital divide in access is, right? When we talk about sort of things like bandwidth access and being able to provide that is more infrastructural. And those are opportunities definitely for improvement across communities. But if we think about the user, and I think the last panel did a really great job on talking about this, how do we approximate the access points where communities, people are more likely to utilize the technology, and thinking from that perspective? It's a whole paradigm shift.
It's a great point. And like everything else, there's no one solution that's going to solve all our problems. And I think, as you mentioned, that each community, each family has different needs, and the technology providers, I think, are getting more attuned to those layers of needs. And I think we're seeing some really exciting innovations around the care space. So I have a question. This is one that we didn't prep for, but I'm interested in your perspectives, because during the pandemic, we saw people engaging in, and Amy, you talked about this before, 24-hour care when they didn't necessarily do that before, or losing the support systems and networks that they had in place before as families became more isolated. And I'm just wondering what you're seeing in the gender divide of caregiving, and if any of this forced communal care models in some families changed the degree to which men and boys took on more caregiving, or are we going to come out of the pandemic as it has always been, with women shouldering the majority of the burden of care? I didn't know if anybody had any thoughts.
I'll just jump in. I think you have a really good point. And I think what I saw was more men jumping in, playing those roles, especially if they were two spouses working from home, children at home, and homeschooling and caregiving for a loved one, which is about 30% of family caregivers are in that sandwich situation. So then there was a lot more of trading off and sharing roles. And we see more men in our online caregiving group than we had in the past. So there was a jump in that. There's still far majority are women. And, I don't have a crystal ball, but I would guess that going forward, there will be a little bit of a bump of more men. We've been seeing this as an increasing trend anyway, from our 2015 survey to our 2020 survey. There were more men playing caregiving roles. So it used to be about 50-50, now it's 60-40. So I think there is going to be a bit of an increase, but I think it will still be majority women.
Yeah, I would also say, like, as a mom of 2 boys and someone who has a household which is largely male dominated, the degree of support that I saw coming from both the boys and my husband was incredible, because again, in the context of the normalizing, I think there is a sense of empathy that got created. You did suddenly see more men talking about the fact that, hey, I need to drop off because, I have the kids and my wife is, going crazy. So there was a degree of empathy and this whole notion of saying we have to do our bit. So I agree with you, Amy. I think, I'm hoping it's a sustained process. One, because there is a visual element to seeing what women are going through. Second is, there's a willingness to contribute. And hopefully, as the next generation who's seen all of us go through this for a couple of years, they've internalized this and, do their bit in moving that 40% further from where it is.
Yeah, I'll chime in and say, I think a lot of that has to do with socialization. I was thinking as I was reflecting on your question, Susan, I was like, it's about socialization. It's about seeing sort of where the shifts are. But in terms of the numbers, I think that there are things that I'm heartened by. One, in our line of work, we are seeing an increase in the number of caregivers who are identifying as men, right? Who are identifying as folks who never would have imagined themselves probably as caregivers before, but because of the pandemic and as a sort of a line or extension of work and healthcare work, it's so that the norming is happening socially for men to enter the workforce as caregivers and also in allied healthcare in support roles. I also believe that because of the impacts of the bottom lines of a lot of companies who have seen that attrition and are finding it hard to, get workers because of sort of the bottom line of that's been drawn and exacerbated out of the pandemic, that caregiving work and what is, the GDP attributed to caregiving work and what that means from a healthcare perspective and an infrastructure perspective, that you are going to have sort of, a revision of what it means to care and the impacts of care, right? I think this is a wonderful sort of platform to be talking about all the impacts socially as well as economically of not being able to sort of fill the gaps and sort of change the paradigm of who does caregiving. And we're starting to see that change, at least professionally.
Yeah, it's a great point, Helen. And I think you raise a really interesting question about who's going to be doing this caregiving moving forward. And all 3 of you, I appreciate the optimism around more gender equity in caregiving, because I think that's critical. It's critical for our families, our societies, and this workforce that we need moving forward. And one of the drivers of that expanded need is of course the aging of our population. And as we have the baby boomers aging upwards, we can see demographically the need for more caregivers. And so, Amy, starting with you, how are we addressing this expanding need for caregivers, both from a numbers standpoint and maybe some evolving capabilities that they're going to need to learn? Any insights there?
Well, we are seeing, as you see, there's a huge growth. 1 in 5 Americans are family caregivers. I think 1 in 6 employees are caregiving in some capacity. So we see this growth, and at ARP, what we're trying to do is understand what the needs are and then be there for them when they need it. And caregivers tend to reach out when they're in a crisis or when there's a certain need. They don't necessarily want to have education about financial management until they're in financial crisis, or they don't want to learn about difficult things like incontinence care unless they're in that situation. So we're trying to have those things available for them and make them easily accessible. I think that the need, especially with so many working caregivers, is for them to be able to access that information when it's convenient to them. So we see more caregivers accessing videos about how, mobility, how to help someone transfer from a bed to a wheelchair, very specific things, nutrition, diet, very specific caregiving tasks are what they're really wanting. And I think that's why this Facebook group I mentioned has been so popular, because they can go in there when they're having a problem and say, oh no, how do I do this? Or how did you manage this? And they get 50 to 60 people saying, okay, here's what worked for me. And so it's a very responsive kind of approach with the family caregivers. Technology is playing a huge role in that. We found during the pandemic that we were reaching far more caregivers than when we just had in-person events and that type of thing. So I think caregiving is being hugely enhanced by the technology options in terms of training, finding support, and connecting with resources. We have a lot of people who use our online community resource finder tool to find those local resources for their loved ones, especially if they don't live in that community, they don't know the community. So I think overall, the possibilities are endless in terms of using technology to find caregivers and connect with them when they need it.
Yeah, it's great to hear. And especially since, going back to one of the topics we started with, which the Great Resignation, people leaving the workforce, and women specifically. One of the things that we hear frequently is that one of the reasons women leave is there isn't enough available, affordable childcare. And Priya, I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the childcare capacity out there, and what needs to be done.
Yeah, so I think right now, childcare as an industry is fairly fragmented, and both providers and centers, these are high fixed cost environments. So you have real estate, you have staff costs, and through the pandemic, as children left, just given the fragmented nature of the industry, capacity went down, and care needs were felt at a disproportionate amount, and probably at an unprecedented level historically. So the question is, how do we systemically create capacity, and what do we do? What is the role of the parent, the employer, and the government in terms of creating what I call the soft infrastructure, right? This is the soft infrastructure that enables women both to stay in the workplace, but also continue to sustain themselves in the workplace. Most moms will settle for something equal to what they can provide at home, but what they're looking for is something better than what they can provide at home in a care environment. So how do you create that infrastructure, and whose responsibility is that, and how do we think about it systemically? The good thing is employers have come forward and are willing to support it. They see workplace childcare as definitely as much of an amenity as food, in an office environment, as transportation in an office environment. So even in the hybrid context, I think this is something that employers are considering, which is an encouraging notion, and all that the government's doing now, from the ARPA funding and the pre-K bills and the effort towards creating that capacity, all of that feels directionally right. And I feel, over time, through all these elements working together, we will find the right infrastructure. The question that I think, which, again, as a mom of teenagers, that I grappled with but didn't realize systemically, was that it wasn't just care that was getting women to quit. It was also educational fallbacks, right? So a lot of children went through setbacks because of online school. And once you realize that a child's falling back academically, what kind of supports would you provide? And so you have to think about what is the point in time need, and whether that's care, whether it's education, whether it's mental health and well-being for children. I think systemically we have to create that infrastructure. Otherwise, we run the risk of, women sort of taking that brunt and leaving the workforce.
Yeah, great points. And in our last couple of minutes, Helen, and then maybe we can go to Amy. what advice do you give women who are either finding themselves in a caregiving challenge sandwiched between children and aging adults, or otherwise contemplating maybe joining the caregiving workforce? Any advice?
I think this is we're into both a critical needs moment, right? A turning point in terms of, to Priya's point earlier, how coming out of this pandemic, the importance of caregiving is valued, right? Whether that's quantified by dollars or the importance to the workforce. And it's also, I think we're going to enter into a golden era of caregiving, born out of competitiveness and what that means right now as an employer. We've had several folks talk about and outline ways in which they're creating flexibility as a means of competitively attracting the workforce. And I think that women can, in 2019, maybe this wasn't as possible, but I certainly do believe in 2022 can stand from a place of power to not have to compartmentalize the part of themselves that is a caregiver, right? It impacts every aspect of life, including work. And so I think it's making sure from a place of advocacy, tying in the value of that individual and speaking that up in terms of looking for an employer and an expectation that employers are making room for women to show up as caregivers. So.
That's great. And Amy, I think we've run out of time, but we'll look forward to hearing from you soon. Let me take this moment to thank Amy, Helen, Priya for your wonderful commentary, and encourage all of our folks in the audience to send a special note of thank you and appreciation to all of our caregivers out there, and look forward to hearing the rest of the panelists during the day. Thank you all.
I am woman. All life starts with me. I am a lifetime of putting others first, but often I come last. My health has been understudied, underdiagnosed, and underrepresented. Until now, I am research. I am numbers too big to ignore. My body is nothing like a man's. It responds differently to pain, stress, and medications, to symptoms and disease. I am research. When I am healthy, the world is healthy. When I am studied, everyone benefits. I am changing the status quo. Understand my differences. See me for who I am. All my beauty and complexity. All my strength and fragility. All my courage and confidence. I am today's breakthroughs and tomorrow's cures. I am progress and innovation. I am hope. I am research.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Varney Marugan, and I am the Senior Director of the Global Initiative on Health and the Economy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, where our purpose is really to spotlight the unique value of the private sector and advocate for investment in public health as a means to directly drive economic resiliency and growth. And data has shown that investment in women's health in particular has proven to really be a best buy for economic development. This is, of course, due to women's longer lifespan, their central role in families and societies, and the fact that they represent over 70% of the global health workforce. And this afternoon, I am very privileged to be joined by Michael Anakin, the Chief Executive Officer at McGee Women's Research Institute and Foundation, as well as Charlotte Simonelli, the Chief Financial Officer at Realogy. And so with that, let's dive right in with the first question. And no matter where you are in the globe, women strengthen communities. When women are healthy, the community is healthy. So Michael, can you tell us a bit more about how McGee prioritizes women's health?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Varney. And first, I'd like to say I've been watching all day here, and the programming has been excellent. So I guess I would be one of those male champions that we talk about. But I'm happy to be that, and I'd like to thank Realogy and Charlotte for everything that they do for us from the corporate side. But when we talk about women, we know that they're 50% of the future. But I think often what gets lost is they give birth to 100% of the future. I'm sorry, they're 50% of the current population, yet they give birth to 100% of the future. And so when we look at that and the power of that statement, we really need to understand that healthy mothers and healthy babies are critical to healthier societies and healthier communities moving forward. And in McGee Women's Research Institute, we really take that, and we also look at the data that comes from what healthier grandmothers mean to grandchildren, or healthier females in the workforce mean to environments in the workforce or workforce culture. And so we really plan on the research portfolio that we have allows us to keep women healthy throughout their lifespan for those reasons. And I don't think as a society, we realize that the field of women's health was started in the early 90s. So there's plenty of catch up to be done there. And one of the things that we look to do is to get a larger mouthpiece about what needs to happen moving forward to play catch up.
Thank you, Michael. That's quite the fact that the field of women's research only started in the 90s. Tanya, can you share a bit more about why Realogy is investing in women's health?
Absolutely. Enabling and advocating for women is something that we are super passionate about at Realogy. And in case you don't know the metrics around it, so female agents, real estate agents, we're in the real estate business. There's 65% of all agents are female. 70% of our company is female. 60% of our leadership team is female, and 36% of our board is female. So we are a highly female-centric company. And if you think about it, like what we do is put people in their home. That's our job, is to find homes for people and to help people sell homes. So making sure that the women's health is advocated for is very important to us. And some of the things that we've done at Realogy, especially in the height of, sort of the transformation during COVID, we've moved to a predominantly virtual workforce. And I know the struggles that a lot of women, mothers, caregivers, all those entities faced during COVID. I mean, we became sort of like part-time teachers at home too. And so the fact that folks could work virtually, and now it's a permanent structure for us, it enables them to have better sort of work-life fit. There's no such thing as balance. I don't believe that there is such a thing as balance, but if you're able to, because you're on a Zoom call, then you can put something on hold for 10 minutes to take care of something that, your child or your aged parent needs help with. And then as far as also like, just for myself personally, I've been able to sneak in like 2 workouts a day because I'm not in the car anymore during my commute. And that has definitely made me healthier. Some folks, I think have gone the other way and have maybe put on the COVID 20, not the freshman 20, it's the COVID 20, but I think it's a choice. And we're trying to give not only our workforce, but also agents choice and how to be more productive, how to work more virtually so they can find ways to fit, whether it's their own personal health or the health of someone they're caring for, as a priority as well.
Thank you, Charlotte. It's really compelling. Question for you both. What role do you think the business community should play in women's health? I know you've both touched on this a little bit as well already. Michael, would you like to go first?
Sure. And I think, the business community could serve as a couple of things. First and foremost, I think the business community can be a mouthpiece for what's going on at the Research Institute here. I know that our corporate partners help us get the word out to their communities, not only their local communities, but also their customer bases and their employee groups. Through their employee resource groups, they have a better understanding of what's available in women's health. Oftentimes, healthcare is delivered locally, but innovation happens globally. And from Pittsburgh, we can impact lives around the globe of women. And without a mouthpiece to help us get the word out about what's available, a lot of those women will never see that innovation, or they won't see it fast enough. The other thing that the business community can help us do, again, with their social good efforts and their employee resource groups, they can help us to be able to talk about the importance of fundraising for women's health research. I think it's sort of taken for granted that the developments just happen and that the government funds a lot of this research, and they do. They fund a great deal of it. But plenty of research, novel research, innovative research, things that are really game changers, they need to be funded with dollars that come outside of those government dollars. And we as a community need to focus on that. And I think the business community has really helped us do that in the past.
Thank you, Michael. Charlotte, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And what I would add too is, health, physical health is important, but there's also mental health, there's financial health. I'm the chair of our women's ERG. I just took on that role recently at Realogy, and we offer monthly programs, and they're tailored. And of course, men can attend as well, but obviously we're a women's ERG, and they're tailored to help with the subjects that are most important to our employees as it is. So there's a lot of interest actually in financial health, and so we run programs for them to enable them to make sure that they're planning well for their retirement. And then on the benefits side, making sure that our benefits are actually tailored to what women need as well. So I think that's an internal lens, but I completely agree with Michael that, I think the business community does have a responsibility. It's apparent to me as a woman that, women's health has only been taken seriously since the late 90s, because there is a lot of catch up to do. And I believe strongly that we do all have to action on it. So I'm very passionate about it.
Couldn't agree more. And certainly sounds like there's a role for communities across all sectors. So the pandemic has forced us all to reflect more on our personal health and well-being. And now Dr. Fauci has said the US has almost reached the end of the full-blown pandemic. How can we ensure that our focus on health remains beyond the pandemic? Charlotte, why don't we start with you first this time?
I think it's absolutely vital, right? So there's also folks post-pandemic that have lingering impacts from COVID if they had COVID. And I think by now there's a vast majority of us that have had COVID at some point. So it's definitely even more important now post the pandemic to prioritize your health. And I think part of that is education. I think, getting the word out. A lot of folks that, had impacts during COVID, whether it be their mental health or whether it be their physical health, they need to understand that they're not alone. And half of the battle is just, seeking help or seeking education or understanding. And then for industries and businesses where, the work environment is different and more flexible, it's affording people different opportunities, like the opportunities I have to prioritize, working out and doing such. But we need to make sure that people actually continue doing that. And that's, as leaders, you sort of have to role model. Like you have to say, oh, let's do a walking meeting, or, I'm going to take a break at 5 because that's my time to work out. We have to role model it so that all of the folks that work for us understand that it's not only accepted, it's actually encouraged.
Absolutely. Michael, your thoughts on how we remain focused on health?
Yeah, I think Charlotte's point about the increased emphasis we have on our individual health is a critical one. I think this made us think about that. I think we need to pay attention to our bodies. I think we need to have conversations with our doctors, especially as women. I think we have to advocate for ourselves in the doctor's office a little bit more. We as a health system are starting to learn how to better listen to communities. When we talk about healthcare disparities, we study the differences between men and women pretty significantly. We also study the differences between different cohorts of women and how different cohorts of women may be impacted differently by certain diseases. And so I think it's important to understand that as individuals, we have to take our health seriously and we have to be our own advocate. I think the other thing to continue to think about is that healthcare research doesn't just come and go. We were able to develop a vaccine very quickly because we had this cadre of basic research to be able to build on that was 15 or 20 years old. And without that basic research that had been the foundation for many of the things that we're seeing really accelerate this pandemic and accelerate the pandemic portion of this COVID-19 disease, we wouldn't have been able to do that. So at the end of the day, I think we always have to have an eye on the future. And oftentimes people wait until something impacts them before they worry about it. But we have to begin to be proactive, whether it be proactive with our own health by exercising, eating right, taking the proper steps to get on regular care regimens, or whether it be proactive with community or global health by doing the right things, investing in the research, investing in the infrastructure available to make health equity important across the globe. I think those are the things that we as society have to continue to do that the pandemic has taught us. Without that, we could be in trouble very quickly when the next pandemic comes around. If we don't have the answers and we don't have a place to go to quickly develop the answers, then the pain is much, much broader.
Thank you, Michael. And it does feel like we are in a revolving door of global crises these days. But as you both mentioned, kind of a sustained focus on women's health remains critically important throughout. So thank you both very much for your insights in this discussion, and especially thank you for continuing to focus on this in your work. And with that, we'll move on to the next panel.
Thank you, Varney, and thank you, Charlotte.
Thanks both.
Hi, everyone. We'll get started here in a few minutes. We're just bringing in our other speaker. Here we go. All right.
Hi there. Thank you, Taryn. So this afternoon, we have a great opportunity to talk about an issue that affects every single one of us. I'm Kana Enomoto. I'm from McKinsey & Company, and I co-lead our Center for Societal Benefit through Healthcare, and I'm joined by Taryn Bird, who is the director of the Kate Spade Foundation, as well as community programs. And we're going to talk about how women are affected in the workplace, particularly around the area of mental health. We've seen with COVID-19 an unprecedented number of Americans experiencing symptoms of mental health, of anxiety and depression, increased substance use, and a great deal of burnout that we've never seen before. And when we look at it, we're seeing that these things don't affect women and men equally, but in fact, women, especially working women, are affected disproportionately. We're seeing women experiencing and expressing less inclusive and less supportive work environments, and then feeling that those environments are causing them to want to leave the workforce. And then those combined stresses leading to increased mental health challenges. So we're looking at 1 in 3 female managers and about 1 in 5 female caregivers reporting experiencing a toxic work environment. So people are belittling them, people are not supporting their assertions or doubting what they're saying, or feeling that they're being put down in a condescending way or being demeaned. And unfortunately, we're seeing that this is even more true for women of color, that they are even at a higher rate feeling like their judgment is questioned or they're being interrupted or spoken over. And all of this in combination with the stress of the caregiving responsibilities, the other anxieties related to COVID and returning to the workplace or continuing to work at a frontline position, we know is having a tremendous effect on people wanting to either get support for those issues or even considering leaving the workplace. So all of these things combined create an environment where there's more opportunity than ever for employers to take a role. And so I think we have a great spokesperson here from Kate Spade with Taryn, able to talk to us about what your journey at Kate Spade has been in terms of being involved in addressing employee mental health.
Thanks, Kana, and thanks for some of those, hard statistics to hear, but important ones to really internalize and ground ourselves for this conversation. My name is Taryn Bird. I'm Senior Director of Social Impact here at Kate Spade, New York, as Kana mentioned. And Kana, thanks for the question on the journey. I feel like it's important to acknowledge that it is a journey and there is no actual final destination. And I think where we are at today at Kate Spade in terms of our mental health journey, started for us about 10 years ago with actually some work we were doing in Rwanda in partnership with a community partner base there that we saw firsthand, which was studied by Georgetown University. The impactful role that providing mental health to women in the workforce has in terms of increasing their voice, choice, power, and ultimate empowerment levels. That was really the first place that we saw how significant a mental health intervention could be at the workforce. And then unfortunately in 2018, we lost our founder to death by suicide. And at the time, made some commitments in the mental health space here domestically, as well as internally within the company. And since then have really integrated mental health into our women's empowerment approach, so much so that we say that it's the heart of how we look at women's empowerment, funding mental health initiatives globally with about 25 nonprofit organizations, and making a commitment to reach 100,000 women and girls with access to mental health resources and tools by 2025. And just rounding it out with your question in terms of our internal journey and our workplace journey, we include our employees in that 100,000. And so that's both our corporate employees and our field employees that are in our stores, in our warehouses. And so I can talk a little bit more about that, but that's a really, really important commitment that we made that's not only for women and girls in marginalized communities, but also for our internal community here at Kate Spade.
Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful to hear what you're doing both inside of Kate Spade and what you're doing for your communities. We know that 9 out of 10 employers have said that COVID-19 has affected their workforce's well-being and their productivity. And most employers are also trying to do something about it. So we hope so there's a great opportunity to create a social shift in terms of how we all think and act on these issues. And more Americans are willing to talk about it than ever before. And so Taryn, I'd love to hear how Kate Spade New York and Kate Spade Foundation are really driving action and awareness on mental health, both inside and outside.
Kana, I'm so glad you asked that question and used the word action. I think that's so important. There's been so much effort on the destigmatization, and there's more work to be done there, but that action piece and providing employees access to resources is so critically important right now. I'll say two things, and these are just two examples of how our company is actioning. The first of which is we do have an internal program that we call Mind, Body, Soul. There's about 60 of us across our corporate and our field teams that are super passionate about mental health and putting on mental health programming within the organization at a monthly level. So we have a lot of grassroots support for this topic, a lot of folks that are incredibly passionate and interested in that. The second piece to that that's also incorporated into that employee group, we offer biweekly meditations as well as monthly newsletters on mental health content and resources that our teams can use and utilize. The most important which is our EAP. I think socializing EAP, talking about our EAP, that's the Employee Assistance Program, is so important. And the second piece that I wanted to mention in terms of how we're actioning is last Mental Health Action Day, which this year is taking place on May 19th. And it's an event hosted by MTV, and they're also very much pushing action from global actors in the mental health space. But we made a commitment to train our teams to become mental health first aiders. And as of today, we have 68 of us across our corporate and our field teams that are trained in mental health first aid. So what that means is that we're resource hubs. We're places that if a team member or a community member is having a difficult time, we understand the signs and the symptoms, but we also can point them towards resources that we have, the most important of which being our Employee Assistance Program. And so we've also made it really easy to activate and to use. We've created a QR code that everybody has access to, so you don't have to go through and look at 5 different websites in order to get that number, but make it really easy to be able to call EAP and engage with EAP. So that's just, 2 ways in which we've worked towards action, but it's definitely an area that we see as a journey. And that's, where we are today, and definitely look to make improvements for the future as well.
That's such exciting work, and a big fan of mental health first aid here. So
it's
really,
so good.
Yeah,
it's so good.
It really makes a difference for people when they feel like they have the tools to respond to someone who's really in need.
Yeah, and even as a manager, it's like you have the language to be able to bridge that conversation with a coworker or a member of your team or even your manager in a way that you might have not had it before. It's just such an amazing program.
It is. I agree. I think so many of us, have the experience of wanting, like we feel like we know there's something wrong or that someone is in need of help, but then we're afraid to say something because we're not sure what to do and we're not sure how they're going to respond. And programs like Mental Health First Aid can equip us with those tools and that knowledge.
Totally.
So kudos to you guys for doing that. We at McKinsey have a framework that we have identified for what we think employers can do. We think they can make mental health a priority, like Kate Spade has, enhance mental health supports, make sure that your benefits are at parity with physical health care, and then cultivate an inclusive culture, measure and hold accountable those services, supports, and leaders in your organization that are in charge of mental health. But also communicating available support. So, EAP programs have like 4 or 5% utilization rates sometimes. People don't know where to go or what's available to them or how important this is to their leadership. So I wonder, Taryn, if you can tell me, how are you guys communicating what's available to your workforce?
Yeah, I think it's not just what you communicate, it's how you communicate it. And one of our core values at Kate Spade is to welcome with warmth. I mean, you'll feel that when you walk into one of our stores, and you're also going to feel that when you get an email from us, regardless of if it's selling you a handbag or if it's telling you about an internal resource that we have. We're very conscious of how important it is to create content with that level of warmth, and we've taken that level of warmth to our sharing mental health resources with our teams. And so I think that's incredibly important. I think the second piece to that, Kana, and you alluded to it a little bit, is we have started to really bridge and work with partners that are in our social impact partnership base but also work with them on internal activations within our own community. So just an example of that, and I know the Born This Way Foundation is a super close friend to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. They're also, real great partners of ours here at Kate Spade, New York, and we've been participating in with them every September in Be Kind 21, which really encourages 21 days of kindness to help to foster individual and collective positive mental health. It's an awesome campaign. If your teams might be interested in how can we get into the mental health space and how can we do this in a really approachable way, I gotta say, Be Kind 21 is a great place to start. So we started that 2 years ago. This past year, through the Kate Spade team, both with our internal teams and our customer, we generated around 100,000 acts of kindness across 6 global regions. And it's just been such a beautiful partnership in so many respects. But that connection between kindness and mental health, I think when people hear mental health, sometimes they're like, whoa, I'm not ready for that yet. That's a lot. And it's as we know, mental health comes on a spectrum, and there's lots of different ways you can practice cultivating positive mental health. And the Born This Way Foundation introduced the Be Kind 21 campaign to us. And it's been such a beautiful expression of how we can bring this work to life in both an internal and an external way, creating that kind of 360 approach. So that's been a really positive partnership and program that we're excited to continue.
I love that. I think we know that making progress on this is going to require innovation. It's going to require taking chances. And that's so exciting to hear that you guys did that. And 100,000 acts of kindness, right? You just put better energy out into the world. I wonder, how has that affected your workforce or your company culture? People worry about how does this affect the bottom line? Is this a distraction? Is this a detraction? How do you guys experience that?
Our company culture is really, really important to us. We were founded by a female entrepreneur in 1994 with a group of 3 friends who were looking to bring new product into the world and doing it in a really meaningful way. And, our company culture is very, very important. And we have our values that we're closely aligned to, which I mentioned, welcome with warmth being one of them, wonderfully determined is another, and so I'd say, our work in the mental health space, I think is deeply connected to our purpose as a brand, which is Joy Colors Life. And, that is something I think that's critically important to not only kind of how your work, connects to your brand purpose, but how we're able to really tangibly help to really bolster our message of joy in a really authentic way that's not only felt through product, but felt through the employee experience. And look, we have work to do there too, just like everybody does. But that should be felt whether you're buying a handbag in one of our stores or you're working in one of our corporate offices here in New York. So that's what we strive for, and what we're continuing to work towards as a group and as a community.
That's amazing. And, as we know, our young people, and the next generation of professionals are more than ever prioritizing their mental health, even in selecting an employer or deciding to stay at an employer. It's 2 out of 3. So I think to the degree that you guys are making that kind of progress, it's really important for the future. And, so excited to hear what you've done, the progress that you've made, and hope that this is a great and shining example for others who are wanting to make a positive impact on women's health, on women's wellness at work, and seeing an example of an employer that is being strategic and proactive in this aspect of transformation and embracing women.
And Kana, I just want to say thank you for the work that you're doing in spearheading, because without that type of data, we would have nothing to be able to point to say things need to change. So thank you so much for the work that you and McKinsey are doing in this space and helping to shine a light on this issue, because it's been underfunded and undervalued for way too long. And without that type of data, things aren't going to change. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for the great conversation.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. It is such a delight to join all of you to discuss this very important topic, women and giving. I am so delighted to be joined by my longtime colleague, Rebecca Moffett. And today, Rebecca and I are going to touch on very different but related topics: how women are positioning themselves as leaders, becoming more visible in the philanthropic sector through their work and their impact. And with so much positive traction and momentum, how we can keep this going and assist and encourage women as they strive to be more impactful and more strategic in their giving. So Rebecca, turning it right over to you.
Una, it is truly an honor to be sharing this conversation with you today. You have been a leader in the sector that I've looked up to for my entire 16-year career here at Vanguard Charitable. Your research has been and continues to be foundational for making philanthropic decisions. So thank you so much. Do you think that you can kick off today's conversation by sharing some of the research and trends related to women and giving, especially considering the impact that COVID has had?
Absolutely. And Rebecca, let me just add that it has also been truly a pleasure to work alongside you and learn from you as well. So let me just start with the big picture and some good news here. Throughout the past 2.5, now almost 3 years, our team has been monitoring how philanthropy has responded and is changing in response to a global pandemic and economic crisis, and also a racial and social justice movement. And what we've seen in this period is truly an expansion in generosity as individual donors, private foundations, and corporations have stepped up in their giving. And we've also seen a rapid advancement in new tools and new vehicles, impact investing, collective impact models, collective giving, and pooled funds. So just to give you some numbers, giving reached $471 billion. That's an all-time record. That's our latest number from Giving USA 2021. This represents an increase of 5.1%. So certainly some good news to celebrate. And now let's turn to women. We've all heard the news about how women across the globe have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. But we've also seen women step up in their generosity, not just in their charitable giving, which we all know is important, but also through their time, their talent, their testimony, their voices, using their voices to speak out in favor of the issues that matter to them, and also through their ties, connecting their friends, their colleagues, and their communities to the causes that matter to them. One of those new areas in giving that we've been tracking is giving to racial and social justice, where we've seen more Americans giving to address inequality more broadly. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Rebecca, keeping in mind that we now have the 5 T's and expansion and generosity, not just giving money, but also many more ways that donors are contributing to responding to these multiple crises.
And I think it's so important for women to understand that, right? That the definition of philanthropy has absolutely expanded and we can make an impact in so many ways. You know, just to dive in a little bit on your comment about talent, you know, I'm sure it's likely not a shock to anyone here that the majority of workers in the social sector are women. And specifically, it's estimated that nonprofit organizations, 61% of CEOs are women and 68% of staff are also women. And there's also a subset of women working in the private sector that lend their talent every single day, whether that's legal advice, business strategy, or even publicity through pro bono projects. It's such an incredible way of having an impact in a non-traditional way. You know, I'll just say we're really proud of that trend, especially on the talent side of women dedicating their careers or leveraging their skills. Vanguard Charitable is a majority female-led organization, and that we're just really excited about. You know, I think I'd love for us to talk a little bit, Una, maybe about the commitment that's required in order for us to sustain this type of impact. What do you think? Should we switch to that?
Absolutely. One other area that we've been tracking are the motivations, why people give. And as you can imagine, women have very specific reasons for giving to the causes that matter to them. And across the period of 2.5 years, we've also seen an inflection point with many more donors. Of course, their values matter to them, but we're also seeing issue-based donors emerge. And when we say issue-based donors, rather than just supporting a nonprofit year over year, some donors are looking broadly at causes like climate change, like gender inequality, and many other areas of giving. And they're seeking to find organizations that align with those issues. That is also very exciting, because I think this is where donors can start to move the needle on an issue as they identify a cause that matters to them, and then find organizations that they can partner with to actually make an impact. So this idea of issue-based donors and donors who are seeking to make a difference and move the needle on some of these newer areas, I think is encouraging and something we could continue to monitor.
Absolutely, Una. And I think finding those causes, a lot of times it is the passion underneath, right, that really drives us forward into committing ourselves to those causes. And, I know that for myself, even, I often will get sometimes caught up a bit in the passion behind the cause that I have. For me, it's really around youth causes. I have a 7-year-old who has an incredible environmental passion, which is fun to see. But I do think it's important for us to take a bit of a step back and say, how might we execute on that passion as well? What is really the importance of being strategic in how we're supporting those causes? And can we really start with some smaller acts? There's one area that I always love to provide some guidance around, and that is in the area of budgeting, this really small act around budgeting. I encourage everyone at the beginning of every year to set aside a budget and really stick to it for charitable giving. You think about that alongside all of your other financial planning, whether that's for college and for housing or retirement. We recently did a little bit of a study, and we found that only 44% of Americans who donated to charity in the past 12 months included monetary charitable donations in their annual budgets. But of those who did, gave nearly 7 times more dollars than those who don't budget at all. And then even more specifically, we see an opportunity for women to increase their giving through budgeting, as our research showed that only 38% of women build an annual charitable budget. It's just such an easy first step in order to keep the momentum going. And it's a commitment that you can make that can help to amplify your impact. It's clear that there's power in budgeting, but I do want to be clear that doesn't mean that I'm suggesting that we all set aside $1 million for budgeting. I think we need to be able to look at our own personal situations and set aside what is right for us. But I will say, and Una, I have to imagine that you get this question also. I'm often asked, I understand that I need to look at my own personal situation, but how much should I set aside for giving to charity in a year? And do you have any thoughts or resources on how someone can determine that?
Well, I'm so glad you raised that point, because in the past few years, we've seen women really lead in making some of these transformational gifts, with women like Mackenzie Scott committing $6 billion in 2020 alone to so many causes. So lots of opportunities to really step up. When we look across the board in the last 3 decades, we've seen giving remain at 2% of GDP. And this 2%, although it has ebbed and flowed in the wake of downturns, it has remained relatively constant. So the call to action today is really, what would we have to do differently to move the needle on that 2%? And perhaps this idea of budgeting could be a powerful way of changing norms around charitable giving. What we see in the data for the average American household, for those who do give, that giving is roughly around 2%, although we do see a variation with some donors giving more. And if you use that as a benchmark and you're looking for resources, we have a tool on the school website called generosityforlife.com, and a new free, easily free accessible tool called the Give-O-Meter that allows you to benchmark your own giving across the country with people who share your similar education, income levels, and many other factors. So visit thegenerosity.com, Generosity for Life, and the Give-O-Meter is freely available if you'd like to experiment with a tool that can help you benchmark. Now, turning it back over to you, we've issued a call to action. Certainly, we can all do something to move that needle, and there's so much need in many of our communities. And as we've already noted, women are stepping up in many ways beyond their monetary resources.
Absolutely. And I think really seeking out that data to help you make those decisions is so critical. The Give-O-Meter is an incredible resource. I have used it many times, so I encourage everyone to take a look at it. And those, especially those free publicly available resources, can really help you to determine how better to make an impact. At Vanguard Charitable specifically, I'm really proud of the resources that we provided donors, especially our NAVI platform, which is the nonprofit aid visualizer. This is a groundbreaking new tool, and it really puts unprecedented data at donors' fingertips via this interactive platform. It makes it really easy for individuals to pinpoint charities that are solving the problems that they care the most about. We first developed this tool, NAVI, to simplify and empower the charitable research and decision-making process of giving to those areas hardest hit by COVID. And most recently, we released an update that focuses on hunger and homelessness in the United States. So I encourage everyone to visit vanguardcharitable.org and use the NAVI tool to find organizations that you may love. Una, I know that you also have a tool that can help individuals find organizations that they care about. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Excellent. Well, thank you for bringing that up. In the past few years, we've all followed the news on how women around the globe have been disproportionately impacted by the COVID pandemic, with increased demands on their time as far as childcare is concerned, and also with economic shocks affecting more women in the workforce. With this as a background, we at the Lilly Family School have been working on a new resource called the Women's and Girls Giving Index, which looks at the charitable landscape here in the United States and finds that of the essentially 1.3 million nonprofits in the US, there are about 470,000 organizations, 47,000 charitable organizations, which represent $8.2 billion in philanthropic support based on the latest year that we have the data. This represents 1.9% of overall charitable giving. So what we found is, despite all the funding that's available in philanthropy, a tiny fraction is going to organizations that are focused on improving conditions for women and girls. We know that investing in women and girls not only transforms communities, but leads to more sustainable paths for communities around the world. And so, to put this in context, we've made this tool available so that people can go into that database and find organizations that are focused on gender equity, understanding that if we really want to improve conditions in all of our communities, the way to start is by investing in women and girls organizations. So another call to action, I'd encourage all of you to take advantage of this new tool to learn more about women's and girls focused organizations. There are many of them that exist, and also to find ways to support organizations that are moving the needle on gender equity, not just in the United States, but around the world. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to Rebecca in terms of compared with everything else that we know, what's next for giving by women and, of course, to women's and girls' causes?
Well, and I love that, Una, and I think to summarize the conversation, the next and really most important big step that women can now take with all of this information in mind is to really become a role model for the next generation and encourage others to give, so that we can sustain this focus, sustain this impact, and sustain this momentum moving forward. And hopefully all of the resources that we provided today can help everyone to do that. Una, so thrilled to have been here with you today.
Thank you so much for this inspiring conversation. Let's continue this momentum.
Absolutely.
What an inspiring day. I'm always reminded at events like this of the power of the private sector to make positive societal change. Thank you to all our speakers for their insights and their incredible efforts to help us achieve gender parity in all aspects of life. We have some really interesting and timely topics to cover tomorrow, from the intersectional experience of women of color in the workplace to diversifying talent pipelines to cultivating the next generation of trailblazers. We have a great lineup of amazing women leaders, including 3 members of Congress, as well as National Geographic CEO and many others, including my boss. And they're all doing tremendous work, and they're excited to share that with you. Now in our 12th year, the U.S. Chamber Foundation is proud to host this event and will continue to work hand in hand with the business community to help create a world that is more inclusive and more resilient. Thank you for your participation today, and we look forward to seeing you at 1 o'clock Eastern tomorrow.